Jaime Lannister stood on the rocky bluff overlooking the frothing sea as wind whipped his golden hair around his face. He had only recently celebrated his 16th name day, but the burden on his shoulders felt far older. Below him, the road leading north stretched on endlessly, winding through patches of pine and looming crags, ultimately disappearing into the dark horizon. The chill of the air was more intense than anything he'd known in the south, a fitting omen, he thought, for what awaited him at the wall. He pressed his lips together, breathing in the salt-laced gusts as he recalled the events that had brought him here. The memories twisted in his mind like bright ribbons half-remembered from a dream, as if he still expected to wake in Casterly Rock and find that this was all some jest. He had been a boy the first time he visited King's Landing, dazzled by the opulent Red Keep, infatuated with the idea of knighthood. And he had nearly attained that dream in the way he'd once imagined, earning accolades on a tourney field, perhaps, or riding to battle at the side of legendary knights. He had been a squire worthy of praise, and Sir Arthur Dane himself deemed Jaime promising enough to knight him. The sword of the morning's regard was worth more than gold, and Jaime had let the pride of it fill his heart. Yet that sense of triumph vanished in a single afternoon when Tywin Lannister, his father, revealed a plan Jaime never could have foreseen. "Your sister will wed Prince Rhaegar if I have my way," Tywin had said, his voice echoing through the solar at Casterly Rock. Outside, seagulls shrieked under a reddening sky. "In time, you will join the Night's Watch, thus preventing any unseemly accusations or illusions about your closeness to Cersei." The words were delivered in that calm, cold, measured timbre Jaime had learned to both respect and dread. He had argued, nearly shouted, "Father, I am already a knight. You promised me." But the memory of Tywin's gaze silenced him. What Tywin Lannister demanded was not to be questioned. Jaime might have pleaded further, but in truth, he recognized he was only a piece on the game board of dynastic alliances. If Cersei were to marry the crown prince, the Lannisters would stand one step below the Targaryens in power. Jaime's presence, as both a young, handsome knight and twin to Cersei, was a complication Tywin would not tolerate. The arrangement was ironclad, a final demonstration of loyalty. King Aerys, though grown erratic and suspicious, would find no reason to fear Tywin's ambition if Jaime took the black. And, in Tywin's mind, Cersei would ascend to royalty untainted by rumors. Jaime, for his part, thought only of how he would never be able to touch a sword with the same freedom again, never be able to marry, never be able to hold a castle in his name, if indeed his father would ever have let him. All the spoils of youth dissolved in an afternoon. But it was the look in his sister's eyes. Rage, betrayal, heartbreak that cut deeper than any sword. Jaime recalled Cersei's fury, how her fingernails bit into her palms at the mere mention of separation. He remembered her hissing, "I will find a way to bring you back." Yet in the end, neither love nor cunning overcame Tywin Lannister's will. So Jaime found himself wrapped in a black cloak before he had truly discovered what it meant to be a knight in the world. A dragon's egg might be gilded and admired, but in an instant it could be shattered. He tugged the cloak tighter around his shoulders, scanning the horizon as the last vestiges of sunlight bled into the waves. The cold made him draw breath in quick, bracing gulps. Yet beneath the chill, an undercurrent of anger and longing burned. He could see shadows of his father and sister every time he closed his eyes, and he wondered how they lived with themselves, forcing him north to a lonely fortress of ice. Tywin was never a man to care about a single pawn's desires, even if that pawn was his son. When he finally descended the bluff, his boots slipping on loose stones, Jaime's new traveling companions awaited him. A few other men in black also returning to the wall, and a silent escort of Lannister guards who would ensure that Jaime made it there without detour. The older members of the Night's Watch, men who bore scars like living testaments to their journeys, spoke little. Jaime was grateful for that silence, for he had no desire to be drawn into conversation about what had led a Lannister scion to such a fate. They likely assumed it was something disreputable, a scandal, or an accusation that made the Black Cloak a better alternative than a headsman's block. Let them think it, Jaime decided. Better that than the truth that he was but another instrument for Tywin's ambitions. They rode on, the journey interminable. Frost crept over the rims of puddles in the morning, and the nights were so cold that Jaime sometimes woke with his hair stiff from hoarfrost. He had thought King's Landing was stifling, that the politics of court weighed on a man's soul. But those days seemed bright and pleasant compared to this silent march into the gloom. He half expected wights to come lurching out of the pine groves at night, for the stories of the long night haunted every child in Westeros. But no specters emerged, only the restless howling of wolves and the rustle of branches as the wind snaked through the trees. At last, the looming shape of Castle Black came into view one dawn. Even from a distance, it looked as if it had been hewn from the night sky itself, dark stone towers and cold courtyards that had stood for centuries beyond counting. And beyond it, a white line that stabbed at the clouds, the wall. Jaime breathed shakily, his heart slamming in his chest. He had heard tales of the wall's size, but to witness it in person was to feel an insect before a mountain. He couldn't fathom how so much ice stood so tall, so enduring. Perhaps, he thought, the wall embodied the history of Westeros more profoundly than any crown or keep. This fortress of frost and stone would be his new home. They entered Castle Black's courtyard quietly. Horses snorted clouds of mist, and stable hands in patched black cloaks hurried to take the reins. Several black brothers, men of varying ages and backgrounds, wandered about in the courtyard. Some paused to gawk. It wasn't every day that a Lannister, and a newly knighted one at that, arrived in their midst. The Lannister guards delivered Jaime to the care of a grizzled man who introduced himself as Bowen Marsh, the first steward. Marsh offered Jaime a curt nod. "We'll see you to the Lord Commander shortly, Sir Jaime, unless you plan to relinquish that title altogether now that you've joined us?" Jaime stiffened. He hadn't thought about that. "A vow to the Night's Watch doesn't erase my knighthood," he said. "I'll still carry it, at least if the vows permit it." Bowen Marsh nodded, neither smiling nor scowling. "You'll find the Night's Watch has need for every skill. If you can fight, if you can lead, if you can teach swordsmanship, that is all to our benefit." His gaze flicked to Jaime's golden hair. "But you'll learn soon enough that titles mean little here. Now come." Jaime followed, the Lannister men trailing him only to deposit whatever possessions he had, mainly clothing, a few tokens of his house. Then they left without ceremony, returning south, back to the warmth and luxury he would never taste again. Part of him wanted to watch them ride off and wish them ill. Another part craved the sight of a lion's banner snapping in the wind, a reminder of home. He forced himself to turn away and climb the steps after Bowen Marsh. Atop the Lord Commander's tower, Jaime found himself escorted into a dimly lit chamber furnished with a simple table, a brazier, and an old chair draped with black bear fur. There, the Lord Commander Jeor Mormont sat, arms folded, his formidable gaze fixed upon the newcomer. Mormont wasn't yet as old as some men rumored, but there was an air of unyielding strength in him, as if he might wrestle a bear to the ground if pressed. "So," Mormont said, drumming his fingers on the wooden table. "Jaime Lannister, son of Tywin Lannister, newly knighted and now sworn to the Night's Watch. You've come early." Jaime managed a careful nod. "I've come to serve, my lord. Or perhaps I should call you Lord Commander." A faint smile touched Mormont's lips. "You'll find we're not so formal here, boy. If you can wield a sword half as well as the songs say you can, the watch will be better for it." He gestured to a stool. "Sit." Jaime sat, uncertain. He waited for Mormont to begin condemning him for the arrogance that must surely accompany a Lannister, but instead, the older man studied him in the glow of the brazier. "Men from great houses come to the watch usually under duress," Mormont said. "I do not ask for your reasons. I do not care about your father's schemes or the intrigues of King's Landing. All that matters is that you stand ready to uphold the vow. The same vow we all share." "I understand," Jaime said quietly. He felt the weight of the vow already. It pressed down upon him, as heavy as all the years ahead. A lifetime in black, no wife, no children, no inheritance. No Cersei. The last vow stung him most, but he smothered the thought. "Do you truly?" Mormont asked, raising a bushy brow. "This is a hard life. If you are half the swordsman we've heard, you'll be expected to train recruits, to lead patrols beyond the wall, to stand vigil at times in the bitter cold. You'll forget the comforts you were born to, and you'll answer to men who were once commoners, criminals, bastards, all equals more or less under our roof." Jaime nodded. "I accept it, my Lord Commander." He corrected himself, deciding not to quibble about titles. Mormont rose, the fur cloak about his broad shoulders shifting. "Very well. Then let's see you clothed, fed, and introduced to your new brothers. Bowen Marsh will show you around. Tomorrow you begin training with the others. You're not above them. You prove yourself like any recruit. Is that understood?" "Yes," That simple word carried finality. Jaime rose, bowed his head, and stepped back, feeling a flicker of relief that this meeting had gone smoothly. Perhaps here he could fashion a new life, even if it wasn't the one he wanted. Bowen Marsh escorted him back down the tower and into the courtyard. "We'll see which of the watch's orders suits you best, but given your skill with a blade, I suspect you'll be placed with the Rangers," Marsh said, squinting at Jaime's sword belt. "Let's find you a bunk in the barracks for now." The barracks was a large, drafty building. The smell of unwashed bodies, boiled cabbage, and old leather drifting through the corridors. Marsh led him to a narrow bed in a cramped room lined with identical frames. A straw-filled mattress was the only luxury. In the adjacent bed sat a broad-faced boy around Jaime's age, rummaging through a sack of clothing. He glanced up with curiosity. "You're the Lannister, are you?" Jaime nodded politely. "And you are." "PYP, short for Papar." He grinned, then extended a hand. Jaime shook it, relieved to see no malice or suspicion, just a friendly, open face. "I've never met a Lannister before. Ought I to bow?" PYP teased. "Only if you want a foot to your backside," Jaime said, surprising even himself with the light banter. He had half expected every man to hate him on sight. They shared a slight laugh, and then Marsh left to attend to other duties, leaving Jaime in the stark reality of his new quarters. The rest of the day blurred. Receiving a set of black garb that fit poorly, learning the schedule of meals in the mess hall, discovering the labyrinthine passages that connected the main keep, the armory, and the training yard. He endured the sideways glances of men who whispered behind their hands. A few snickered at the notion of a coddled lion playing at being a crow. Jaime felt his pride flare, but he kept his temper in check. He was here to endure. He could not change his father's decree, but he could shape how he survived it. Early the next morning, a pale light suffused the courtyard as Jaime stood in the training yard, a sword in his hand, facing off against a tall, sallow man known as Alliser Thorne. The master-at-arms, whose mouth seemed set permanently in a sneer, wasted no time in testing Jaime's skill. "Let's see if you're as golden with a blade as you are in hair, Lannister," Thorne barked. Jaime set his feet and raised his practice sword. The Watchers, a handful of new recruits and older rangers, lined the edge of the yard. Thorne attacked swiftly, aiming a slash at Jaime's shoulder. Jaime parried, responding with a lunge that Thorne sidestepped. Their wooden blades cracked in the crisp air as they exchanged blows. Jaime felt a surge of excitement. This was what he had trained for. Perhaps it wasn't the Red Keep's yard or the glamorous lists of attorney, but the dance of steel felt as familiar as breath. In a flurry of motion, Jaime turned Thorne's next strike aside and stepped inside his guard, hooking Thorne's blade arm. With a twist, Jaime brought his own sword to Thorne's throat, stopping a hair's breadth from contact. The Watchers went silent. A flicker of anger burned in Thorne's eyes. Still, he only muttered, "You'll do," and jerked his arm free. "At ease, recruits. We've a real swordsman amongst us." Jaime lowered his sword, aware of the stares. PYP, from the sidelines, gave him a wide grin, while a tall youth with straw-colored hair scowled, clearly unimpressed. Thorne paced, glancing around. "If you lot fight half as well as him, we might stand a chance when the wildlings come. Now, pair off." The next hours were a welter of practice matches and drills, a punishing schedule of lunges and parries, shield blocks, and counters. Jaime relished it even though the cold stiffened his fingers and forced him to shift his grip frequently. If he was to be caged in black, at least he'd keep his sword arm sharp. When the session ended, his brow was damp with sweat, his muscles pleasantly sore. For a few precious moments, he almost forgot he was a prisoner of duty. As the days turned into weeks, Jaime discovered the rhythm of life at Castle Black. Dawn was a clamor of horns, the men stumbling from their beds to break their fast on the simplest of fare, often bread, salt fish, and a bowl of thin stew. Then training, chores, or ranging missions occupied the bulk of their daylight. Nights were spent shivering in the common hall or huddled near the fires if they were lucky enough to be assigned indoors. Sometimes men swapped stories or played at dice. Others sulked in corners, consumed by regrets. Jaime tried to avoid lamenting his past. Longing for Cersei or his old life only made the present bitterness sharper. Instead, he focused on excelling in his duties. With each passing day, word traveled among the Night's Watch the Lannister could fight. A few older rangers tested him more rigorously than Alliser Thorne had, but Jaime proved himself again and again. He even began to train younger recruits, showing them how to balance footwork and leverage their body weight properly. These small achievements lent him a flicker of pride, a sense of belonging he had never expected to find here. Yet not everyone was pleased by his presence. A short, wiry man named Rast made barbed remarks whenever Jaime passed. "Think gold hair means you'll be better than the rest of us? Think again." Once, after Jaime bested him in a training bout, Rast spat near Jaime's boots, muttering curses. Jaime tried to remain detached, but pride was pride. Another time, that tall straw-haired recruit named Todd leveled resentful glares at Jaime every time Thorne singled him out for praise. Jaime recognized envy, an emotion that needed only a spark to ignite into a brawl. But he kept his eyes forward, determined not to let them provoke him. He had the discipline that came from years under Tywin's roof, learning when to speak and when to keep silent. In the quiet hours, Jaime wrestled with conflicting emotions. He missed Cersei fiercely. In fleeting moments, he recalled her soft voice, her clever smile, the sense of completion he felt when she was at his side. He had grown up twinned with her in every sense. Without her, the world felt strangely unbalanced. Some nights, he dreamed of her face, only to wake in the frigid darkness of the barracks, disoriented and hollow. What was she doing now? Had she managed to catch Prince Rhaegar's eye as Tywin intended? Or was she still fuming, seeking ways to undo Jaime's exile? But the vow of the Night's Watch was clear: take no wife, hold no lands, father no children. Sever ties to your old life. Jaime might be able to keep his knighthood, but the rest of it was forfeit. So he threw himself into the duties. Over time, he gradually earned some grudging respect. Most nights, he ended up around the same table in the common hall with Pyp, Gren, a quiet bear of a young man from the north, and Samwell Tarly, an overweight boy from Horn Hill who had been forced to join the Watch by his father. Though Sam lacked courage with a blade, he possessed a sharp mind for history and a gentle spirit that made Jaime feel oddly protective. Then came word that the realm was in turmoil. Whispers drifted in on cold winds. Prince Rhaegar had quarreled with King Aerys. Rumor had it that Rhaegar despised his father's cruelties and sought to steer the realm toward peace, but the king remained paranoid, seeing traitors in every shadow. Tensions simmered, stoked by the disappearance of Lyanna Stark and the subsequent outrage from House Stark and House Baratheon. Jaime listened to every snippet of rumor, piecing them together like bits of cloth in a patchwork. He recalled how Tywin Lannister had once served as Hand of the King but left the position in anger when Aerys slighted him. Now, Robert Baratheon and Eddard Stark were rumored to be rallying forces to demand Lyanna's return. The Targaryens were said to be mustering loyal bannermen. Some whispered of war, though it was not yet in full bloom. Jaime heard the name Tully, Arryn, and rebellion whispered in corridors. And all the while, he remained here, at the top of the world, bound by a vow that forbade him from taking sides, from intervening. The realm might go up in flames, but the Night's Watch would stand apart, shielding Westeros from threats that came from the icy north, not the Iron Throne. Jaime felt a strange emptiness. He had always imagined fighting in the midst of the greatest battles, forging his legend in armor with a lion crest. Now that dream was dust. As the year turned, the cold bit deeper. The snows came more frequently, blanketing the courtyards and towers until Castle Black looked like a black smudge in a white desert. Routine carried on. Men were assigned to tend the stables, gather firewood, repair the crumbling sections of the castle. Jaime spent hours on the wall itself, standing watch with the wind shrieking around him. On clear days, he could see far into the north, the haunted forest spread out like a dark sea of pines, riven by frozen streams. To the south, the horizon shimmered with the suggestion of a different world, one he no longer belonged to. One blustery afternoon, after hours of guard duty atop the wall, Jaime descended the great elevator to find the courtyard in an uproar. Rangers were returning from a ranging expedition, dragging with them 2 wildling captives. People crowded in, eager for a glimpse. The wildlings, a man and a woman, both as lean and feral as wolves, were bound with ropes, a bruise blooming on the man's cheek and dried blood crusting on the WOM. Anne's temple. They spat curses in the old tongue, glaring around as if daring someone to come closer. Jeor Mormont emerged to question them. Jaime hovered near the fringes of the gathering, wanting to hear. The wildlings insisted they had come south only to flee things that walk in the night. Although their ravings were confused. One moment, they cursed the crows for blocking their path. The next, they warned of dead men with blue eyes. A hush fell over the watchers at the mention of such superstitions. Jaime felt a prickle of unease. He had always heard stories of the others as fables to frighten children. As the watch debated what to do with the captives, The wildling man suddenly lunged, snapping the rope that bound him. He hurled himself at one of the Black brothers with a snarl. Before anyone could react, Jaime stepped forward, drawing his sword in a fluid motion. He intercepted the wildling's charge, locking blades. The man wielded a chipped axe, swinging it desperately. Jaime sidestepped, then disarmed him with a swift blow that knocked the axe spinning. He pressed his sword tip to the wildling's sternum, forcing him to freeze or die. The courtyard stilled. Jaime stared at the wildling, adrenaline roaring in his veins. Slowly, rangers rushed in to subdue the prisoners again. A handful of Black brothers slapped Jaime on the shoulder in congratulations. But Jaime felt no triumph, only a faint pity. The wildlings were refugees in their own land, scrabbling to survive beyond the wall. Still, he had done his duty, protected his brothers from harm. Lord Commander Mormont nodded once in acknowledgement. Well done. No one's truly safe here, Lannister. That's the lesson you must never forget. Jaime's breath lingered in white plumes. He felt the hush of the courtyard, the weight of eyes on him. Yet for the first time he sensed a flicker of genuine acceptance from these men. He might be a Lannister by blood, but up here, in the land of ice and wind, a man was measured by what he did when danger arrived. Jaime had acted without hesitation. That action spoke louder than heraldry ever could. Life continued in the shadow of rumors from the south. With each messenger's arrival, the courtyard buzzed anew. Robert Baratheon had challenged Rhaegar Targaryen in open rebellion. Eddard Stark had joined him. The Vale had declared for them. House Tully was forging alliances. Aerys responded by demanding the heads of traitors, by commanding Tywin Lannister to reaffirm his loyalty. Jaime wondered what Tywin's next move would be. Would the Lord of Casterly Rock join the Crown or the rebels? Either path contained risk. Tywin had a cold mind for advantage, and though he had forced Jaime into the Watch, Jaime couldn't entirely quell the old sense of grudging admiration for his father's cunning. The months wore on. Spring teased the horizon, though it remained bitterly cold at the wall. One morning, Jaime was summarily summoned to the Lord Commander's solar again. He found Jeor Mormont seated at his table, reading a raven's message. Mormont set it aside when Jaime entered. "You have a visitor, Lannister," he said, his tone revealing nothing. "A visitor? Who would travel this far?" Mormont grunted, gesturing for Jaime to follow. They descended to a private chamber where a brazier glowed. There, Jaime's heart nearly stopped. Standing by the flames, wearing a cloak lined with fur and an expression of cautious relief, was Tyrion Lannister, his younger brother. Tyrion's mismatched eyes flicked up. He offered a lopsided smile. "Jaime," Tyrion said quietly, voice tight, "you look well, considering the gloom of this place." Jaime stared, a flood of emotion catching him off guard. He had not seen Tyrion since the day of his knighting, when Tyrion had rushed to congratulate him, only to be shooed aside by the Lion Lord father. Embracing his brother with a quick step forward, Jaime forgot for a moment all the walls he'd built within himself. Tyrion returned the embrace briefly, then stepped back, clearing his throat. Mormont tactfully excused himself, leaving them alone. "How in the seven hells did you get here?" Jaime asked. "Traveling alone is dangerous, Tyrion. I came with a small retinue from House Lannister. Not father's men, if you're wondering. Trust me, he doesn't know I'm here, or he wouldn't approve. But I wanted to see you." Tyrion's voice was subdued. "Much is happening, Jaime. War or close to it. I was in King's Landing for a time, then at Casterly Rock. The tension is as thick as boiled leather. Father waits to see which way the wind will blow. But I needed to know how you fare." Jaime let out a slow breath. Tyrion's presence reminded him of a time before all the regrets. "I'm alive. My sword arm is strong. I sleep in a bed that's too short, in a chamber that's too cold, and I wake every morning to see a wall of ice that defies belief. It's not what I imagined." Tyrion nodded, his brow knitted with sympathy. "I tried to speak up for you, you know, but Father cannot be swayed," Jaime finished. "I know." He regarded Tyrion carefully, noticing how his brother's gaze flicked around as if expecting watchers or eavesdroppers. "How is Cersei?" A moment of silence. Tyrion hesitated, then answered, "She is in King's Landing. The prince is otherwise occupied with the talk of war. Aerys watches everyone like a hawk. Rumor says Rhaegar left the city with some of the crown's forces to deal with the rebels. Cersei remains there, a guest of the court, or a hostage, depending on your perspective." Jaime's heart lurched. "Hostage? You mean Father's plan? Father hopes to see her wed to Rhaegar if the Targaryens emerge victorious. But events are spiraling beyond any one man's control, Jaime. The realm is on the brink of rebellion, led by Robert Baratheon. You know how these things go. Battles, sieges, alliances shifting like quicksand." Tyrion shifted uneasily. "I can't say how it will end or what will become of our sister. I only know that Father remains at Casterly Rock waiting. He's not declared for either side. If the rebels look likely to win, perhaps he'll join them to preserve our seat. If the Targaryens rally, maybe he'll renew fealty. I suspect he hopes to lure them into a position of weakness, then strike when it suits him." Jaime let out a bitter laugh. "Typical of Father. I shouldn't expect less. And me? I'm just a piece in the game, out of the way." Tyrion's eyes shone with a sadness that tugged at Jaime's heart. "I won't pretend to understand all Father's motivations, but I do know he cares about the prestige of the Lannister name above all else. You and I, well, we're pawns in that sense, though you especially so." "I'm sorry." They stood in silence, the brazier crackling. Jaime felt conflicting urges, to demand more news, to rage at Tywin, to beg Tyrion to carry a message to Cersei. But pride kept his lips tight. At length Tyrion said, "I wish you could come south with me, Jaime, but your vows out." "My vows keep me here," Jaime finished for him. "And even if I broke them, Father wouldn't want me at his side. I'm an inconvenience now." Tyrion laid a hand on Jaime's arm. "You have my admiration, brother. You survived Tywin Lannister's gambit and still stand strong. If there's one thing I know about you, it's that you'll find a way to thrive anywhere." Jaime forced a faint smile. "Don't flatter me too much, Imp. The cold might freeze my vanity." They chuckled, though the sound was hollow. Tyrion stayed but a single night, departing early the following morning, leaving Jaime feeling both grateful for the visit and more alone than ever. Tyrion's news churned in his mind. The realm was unraveling, and he was stuck beyond the edge of the map, powerless to do anything except fight wildlings and watch the horizon. In the months that followed, the war blossomed into full rebellion. Ravens brought tidings of battles at the Trident, of Rickard and Brandon Stark's brutal deaths at the hands of King Aerys, of Robert Baratheon's victory over Rhaegar Targaryen, and ultimately of Tywin Lannister marching on King's Landing, allegedly to aid the crown, only to sack the city when the gates were opened in trust. Jaime read these messages on the board in Castle Black's common area, or he overheard them from stewards passing through. He felt a hollow shock learning that Rhaegar was dead, that House Targaryen was all but finished. King Aerys had been slain in his own throne room, rumors said, though by whose hand was uncertain. Eddard Stark had taken the city, Robert Baratheon was crowned the new king, and the remnants of the Targaryen family fled across the narrow sea. Jaime's heart twisted, imagining how Cersei felt amid all this chaos. Had she escaped? Was she wed to some new suitor for the sake of alliances? He had no word. He could only guess that Tywin was rewarded by the new king for his timely betrayal of Aerys. Perhaps House Lannister grew stronger still. Meanwhile, Jaime remained in black, a solitary lion among crows, far from the realm's newly forged destiny. One crisp morning, he joined a ranging party led by Ser Jeremy Ricker. They were to patrol beyond the wall, investigating whispers of wildling gatherings. Jaime rode at the head of the column, his cloak wrapped tight. The forest swallowed them with its towering pines, the floor buried under drifts of snow that reached a horse's knees. Their breath fogged the air, and frost clung to the horses' manes. They traveled for days without encountering anything more than old footprints and occasional glimpses of deer. But then, as they made camp near a half-frozen stream, a scout rushed back to them, breathless. "We found a wildling camp. Abandoned now, but still warm coals in the fires. They can't be far." Ricker nodded, gesturing for silence. Jaime felt adrenaline stir. He had scuffled with wildlings before, but never in such uncertain territory. They followed the scout's lead deeper into the forest. Twilight stretched the shadows into eerie shapes. At last, they spotted movement ahead. Figures melting between the trees, silent as ghosts. The rangers advanced carefully, but the wildlings had watchers as well. A shrill whistle broke the silence, followed by the crack of an arrow. One of their men fell, an arrow lodged in his throat. Shouts went up. Jaime drew his sword, spurring his horse forward. He caught sight of half a dozen wildlings rushing from behind a thicket, axes and spears raised. Jaime angled his horse to intercept them, heart-pounding. The clash was brief but bloody. Jaime engaged a wiry wildling with a face daubed in red paint. The man danced aside, slashing at Jaime's horse. Jaime kicked free of the stirrups, leaping down to avoid being thrown. He landed in the snow and rolled to his feet, just in time to block the wildling's blade. Their weapons rang out, echoing through the pines. Jaime moved with fluid grace, turning the man's attacks aside. He felt the old thrill of combat rising in him, that fierce concentration that banished all doubt. One thrust, two, a feint, and he found an opening. He ran the wildling through the side, hearing the gasp of pain. Around him, rangers fought in small pockets of violence. Ser Jeremy Ricker engaged two wildlings at once, parrying furiously. An arrow thudded into a tree near Jaime's head. He spun and glimpsed a bowman taking aim again. No time to close the distance. Jaime raised his sword in a desperate attempt to ward off the arrow, but a ranger from behind the bowman tackled him to the ground. Moments later, the forest fell silent, save for the groans of wounded men. The rangers regrouped. They had lost 2 men, but the wildlings had fared worse. A handful lay dead in the snow, and the survivors had fled. Jaime knelt over a ranger struck by a spear, trying to stanch the bleeding. He cursed the thin resources they had. They couldn't linger here. The man shivered, delirious. Jaime pressed a rag to the wound. "Hold on," he whispered. They rode back to the wall at full speed, but the wounded man died on the journey. Jaime felt the sting of loss, though he had never grown particularly close to the fallen ranger. It was a reminder of the fragility of life here, on the edge of the known world. The realm might shift thrones and crown new kings, but the struggle in the north was eternal, unrelenting. When they returned to Castle Black, it was to find a new crisis waiting. A small band of younger recruits had deserted, making off in the night. Lord Commander Mormont was livid, raging about the dishonor. Punishment for desertion was death, and a patrol was organized to track them down. Jaime found himself part of that patrol, riding through the dark forests again, searching for men who had once shared the same roof. They found them after 2 days. The deserters had chosen to hide in an old watchtower near a frozen lake. When cornered, they refused to surrender. A short, savage battle followed. Jaime tried to reason with them. He even shouted, "Lay down your arms. The Lord Commander will show mercy." But the deserters, fearful of the penalty for desertion, fought with the desperation of cornered rats. In the end, 3 were killed, and the remaining 2 were taken captive, one of them gravely wounded. Back at Castle Black, Mormont pronounced the sentence. The wounded deserter died on the return journey, while the last one, barely more than a boy, knelt in the courtyard as Mormont raised his sword. Tradition stated that the one who passes the sentence swings the sword. With a heavy expression, Mormont did just that, beheading the boy in front of the gathered watch. Jaime averted his eyes but forced himself to watch at the last moment, remembering the old adage that a lord must witness the justice he dispenses. Even if you wore black instead of a golden lion, you were responsible for your actions here. Thus, winter's cold wore on, marked by grim tasks and fleeting camaraderie. Jaime worked alongside men he would never have given a second glance in the south. He taught swordsmanship to a butcher's son, who in turn taught Jaime how to gut fish without spoiling the flesh. He shared black bread and laughter with a stable hand who had once been a sellsword in the free cities. He learned how to keep his body warm by layering furs and leathers, how to walk in deep snow without exhausting himself, and how to make a fire in the midst of a blizzard. Day by day, the chores and duties chipped away at the gilded edges of the Lannister scion, revealing something more elemental. A man forced to rely on his skill and wits amid the harsh realities of the wall. And he found, to his cautious surprise, a sense of unity. No matter how different their pasts, each black brother faced the same bitter wind, the same creeping darkness beyond the wall. They shared the same vow, the same meager rations, the same bunkhouse. Jaime might never forget the lost glories of the South, but here he found a new kind of dignity. He was forging an identity that wasn't shackled entirely to Tywin Lannister's schemes. Then came the day a raven arrived bearing grave news from the southern front. Robert Baratheon had secured the throne, Tywin Lannister had been named his new hand, and the Targaryen children had fled across the sea. The war was over, or nearly so. Men whispered that a new dawn had broken over Westeros. The rebellion had concluded in a wave of violence, and now a calm was settling. But the repercussions for the Night's Watch were minimal. The monarchy might change, but the Watch's oath did not. Jaime read the message with the same detached interest he might have given a random tavern brawl. The words Tywin Lannister, Hand of the King, flickered like a personal slight. While his father rose in power and wealth, Jaime remained exiled. On a clear, frigid morning, Lord Commander Mormont summoned Jaime to the top of the wall. They stood together looking out over the vast northern expanse. The sunrise cast pale pink and gold across the sea of trees. Mormont's breath steamed in front of him. "Your father is Hand of the King," he said, voice gruff. "He sent a raven to me, inquiring about your well-being." Jaime felt something tighten in his chest. He inquired? The question tasted bitter on his tongue. "Aye. He wants to know if you are content." Mormont's tone indicated he found that question somewhat absurd. "He mentioned you might be recalled to King's Landing if you still harbor loyalty to the new king. He said something about a place in the King's Guard if you so desire." A jolt of shock traveled through Jaime. The King's Guard, an honor he had once dreamed of, to serve the king as one of his 7 sworn protectors. But that dream had belonged to a time when he saw knighthood as purely glorious before the bleak reality of politics. Now he understood that the King's Guard was as much a cage as the Night's Watch. "But I've taken my vows," Jaime said haltingly. "Indeed you have," Mormont said, watching him carefully. "That vow is for life. The question is, do you intend to keep it? Or do you wish me to release you so you can go south?" Jaime swallowed. "You have the power to do that?" He knew that once vows were taken, they were meant to be absolute. But if the new king and the Hand demanded an exception, perhaps it could be arranged. The notion set his mind spinning. Could he leave this place, rejoin the Game of Thrones? Would he see Cersei again? Mormont's expression hardened. "It would be unusual. But I suspect Tywin Lannister is prepared to leverage all manner of influence. He might claim the vow invalid, that it was forced upon you. There is precedent for men to be freed from the black if the king so decrees. The question is, what do you want, Jaime Lannister?" Jaime turned away, letting his gaze roam the endless forest. Once he would have leapt at the chance. To be a Kingsguard knight, revered and close to power, all while reuniting with his sister. But these months in black had changed him in ways he couldn't fully articulate. The brothers of the Watch might be rough, uncouth, and from every walk of life, but they had become something akin to family. He had found a place here that felt oddly honest. If he went south, he would be Tywin's pawn again, or Robert Baratheon's man, fawned over by the same nobles who had once spat upon the name of traitors. He would stand guard for a king whose character he barely knew, for reasons that might be no more than political expediency. He thought of the realm consumed by civil war, the horrors inflicted in King's Landing, and the endless cycle of ambition. Here, beyond the wall, men had only each other. Day by day, they faced actual threats, the wildlings, and perhaps darker things that lurked in the old stories. Jaime had never felt more alive than in those moments, fighting side by side with other rangers, defending each other. Quietly, he replied, "I took the vow. I meant it even if it began as my father's will. I'll keep it, Lord Commander. My life is the Watch's now." Mormont's grim face softened just a fraction. "Then I will send Tywin Lannister your refusal." "You should be certain of this, Jaime." "I am." The words came out in a steady breath, as if a weight were lifting from his shoulders. "I don't want to be used to further my father's ambitions anymore. If the realm has a new king, let him find other swords. I belong here." Mormont nodded, a spark of respect in his eyes. "A man who keeps his vows is a rare thing, Lannister." "Very well. Return to your duties." Jaime gave a slight bow and turned away, the cold wind tugging at his cloak. As he descended into the main courtyard, a swirl of emotion churned inside him: pride, anxiety, sorrow, and a strange relief. "I am a Jin Cersei's face if she heard his decision. Fury, disbelief, maybe heartbreak. But also, perhaps, a grudging admiration. He couldn't know, for he would not see her. He had chosen a path that led away from the realm of Lannisters and Targaryens and Baratheons. Let them squabble over the Iron Throne. He would stand with his brothers in black. That evening, as he sat at a scarred wooden table in the common hall, sipping a thin ale and listening to PYP recount a comedic tale, Jaime felt a subtle sense of belonging. He caught the nod of greeting from Alliser Thorne, though the Master-at-Arms still wore a perpetual sneer. He noticed Samwell Tarly glancing at him with something like admiration. He recalled how the Rangers had clasped his shoulder after a tough fight, how they had begun to rely on him. That was worth more than any hollow throne room courtesy. Days slipped into weeks and life at the Wall marched on. Ranging parties scouted deeper as rumors of Mance Rayder, a rogue black brother turned king beyond the Wall, surfaced. Jaime found himself frequently assigned to these forays given his prowess. Each mission into the forest tested his survival skills and he grew leaner, harder, more attuned to the land's silence. In the hush of the pines, he sometimes felt the old pang for the gold and red banners, the family pride. But the yearning was a faint echo now, overshadowed by the pressing demands of the present. Winter's grip was reluctant to yield, and well into what should have been spring, the snows still came. Each time the stronghold stores ran low, stewards fretted over how to feed all the mouths. Tensions occasionally flared in the yard, men snapping at each other over trifles. Yet camaraderie prevailed more often than not, for they had no one else to depend upon but each other. Late one afternoon, Jaime found himself perched on the wall, staring into the distance as the sun dipped low. He relished these moments of solitude when he could think without interruption. As the sky turned to lavender and gold, he heard a familiar shuffle behind him. Turning, he saw Lord Commander Mormont approach. Mormont joined him at the icy edge, resting thick arms on the stone rampart. Beautiful sight, isn't it? Jaime nodded. It is. They stood in companionable silence until Mormont said, "Word is your father's consolidated power. The new king rules. The realm is at peace if that word still means anything. And you remain here. No regrets." A pang rose in Jaime's chest. Memories of Cersei, of Tywin's formidable presence, of the illusions he once held about the king's guard. But they felt distant as though belonging to another life. "No regrets," he said softly. "I will make my own path here." Mormont grunted approval. "Then we'll see to it you have the chance. You're one of our best with a sword, but more than that, you've earned the respect of the men. That's not easily done, especially for a lion in crow's feathers." Jaime allowed a small grin. "I've come to appreciate the feathers." A faint chuckle rumbled in Mormont's chest. "Well said. That's well said indeed." He clapped Jaime on the shoulder. "Come down when you're ready. There's a fresh pot of stew cooking, and I'd rather not leave any for the rats." Jaime watched him depart, then turned his gaze back to the vastness. The unending wilderness before him no longer seemed as desolate. In it, he saw a land of new challenges, new victories, a realm free from the crushing manipulations of southern courts, a realm that needed every able sword to stand watch against unseen terrors. He exhaled, letting the ice-laden wind sting his lungs, letting the last colors of twilight burn across the sky. He was Jaime Lannister, son of Tywin, twin to Cersei, knighted by the legendary Arthur Dayne, and now a sworn brother of the Night's Watch. Once, that might have sounded like a tragic tumble from grace. But here, atop the highest rampart in the known world, he felt, for the first time, genuinely free. The following day, training resumed as usual, but the men moved with an undercurrent of energy that Jaime recognized. It was the simple bustle of living. He caught glimpses of newer recruits gawking at the size of the wall, frightened boys from distant corners of Westeros. He remembered how he had once stood like that, filled with dread and anger. Now he was the one they looked at with awe when he sparred, the one who calmly offered pointers. It startled him to realize how time had changed his perspective. Night came, dark and cold, but the fires in the hearth burned bright, and the tables were rowdy with men swapping tales, boasting, complaining about chores. Jaime found a place near PYP, Sam, and Gren. A dice game was in progress, coins of little value clinking across the rough wood. He joined in, placing a small bet. The laughter and curses that followed felt almost familiar, like the banter of longtime friends. After an hour, when Sam had lost thrice in a row, he flung up his chubby hands. "I yield. The gods have no mercy on me." Jaime chuckled. "If it's any comfort, Sam, I doubt the gods take an interest in dice." PYP grinned, raking in his small pile of winnings. "Then perhaps you should pray to the old gods next time, Sam." Sam shot him a timid smile and gathered what remained of his coins. The conversation shifted to the strange lights someone claimed to have seen beyond the wall, dancing greenish shapes in the sky. Another man insisted it was only an aurora, a natural phenomenon. A heated debate ensued, men spinning wild theories of ghosts and others. Jaime listened, amused. In the back of his mind, he remembered the wildling prisoner's warnings of dead men with blue eyes, but he dismissed it as fearmongering. Sometime later, he slipped out of the hall for a breath of fresh air. The courtyard lay quiet, a pale moon shining overhead. He stood there, letting the silence enfold him. He recalled the day he left King's Landing, the swirl of red cloaks, the heartbreak on Cersei's face. It felt like a lifetime ago. Perhaps it was. He was no longer that golden boy, naive and proud. He had faced hardship, known loss, and found a new resilience. A door creaked behind him, and Alliser Thorne stepped out, his face caught in moonlight. For once, there was a begrudging respect in Thorne's eyes as he looked at Jaime. "Lion," he said, using the nickname with less scorn than usual. "You're decent with those recruits." Jaime arched an eyebrow. "That almost sounds like praise, Ser Alliser." A grunt escaped Thorne. "I don't dole out praise lightly. Don't expect me to coddle you. But I see you've accepted your place. That's more than I can say for some highborn brats who come here." Jaime nodded, taking it for the compliment it was. Thorne gave him a curt nod in return and trudged off, leaving Jaime in the silent courtyard. A slight smile touched Jaime's lips. Earning even a modicum of Alliser Thorne's respect was no small feat. The months bled into a year and then another. Jaime rose in the ranks of the Rangers. He led patrols with calm efficiency, fought off wildlings and shadowcats, survived storms and near starvation in winter snows. He learned to take pride in tasks he once considered beneath him, mucking stables, mending torn cloaks, assisting stewards with inventory. By the time the first hints of genuine spring thaw arrived, he had become a fixture at Castle Black, a man others looked to for guidance and skill. At each vow ceremony for new recruits, Jaime stood among the Black brothers, chanting the words that once felt like a doom but now struck him as an affirmation. "Night gathers, and now my watch begins." He spoke them with conviction, believing anew in the purpose that bound them all. The realm below might roil with new intrigues, Robert's rule, new alliances, fresh betrayals, but here, in the austere shadow of the wall, men wore the same black cloaks and faced the same frigid nights. They were wardens against an ancient threat, even if most believed those threats were only stories. Jaime, too, had once mocked such legends, but experience taught him that some legends held seeds of truth. One day, he thought, war or peace might beckon from the south. Perhaps Cersei would attempt to bring him back into the fold, or Tywin would demand his presence yet again. But he felt certain now that he would not be swayed. He had chosen his path, and it gave him a kind of strength that gold and titles could not offer. For the first time, he was the architect of his own fate. So he carried on day after day, forging friendships in unexpected places. He stood watch through endless nights, blade at his hip, eyes scanning the icy horizon. With each breath, he cast aside another piece of the man he had been, the Golden Lion. In the cold hush of the north, he embraced a new identity. Jaime Lannister, Ranger of the Night's Watch, sworn brother, guardian on the edge of the world. And in that identity he found a purpose worth living for, free from the shadow of Tywin's ambitions and the constraints of political chess. He had discovered, at last, something like true honor, and that was a treasure more precious than any crown. Jaime Lannister rose before the dawn each morning, stepping out into the frost-rimed yard of Castle Black where the snow crunched underfoot and the air tasted of iron. It had been years now since he had first arrived, young and embittered by the will of Tywin Lannister. Time had lost some of its meaning here, at the edge of the world, measured less by the turning of seasons than by the endless cycle of cold. Even in summer, the wind remained biting, and though on rare clear days the sun might warm the stones of the courtyard, one could never entirely forget the wall of ice towering over them. He had learned to move through his duties with steady purpose. At first, he had clung to them to forget what he had lost, but gradually he embraced them for their own sake. He drew the newer brothers into training sessions each dawn, teaching them the art of swordsmanship while the sky still lay draped in the deep blues and violets of early morning. Then, once the day properly began, he joined patrols or oversaw repairs of the outer walls of Castle Black. Sometimes he spent afternoons in the library with Samwell Tarly, who had proven invaluable in deciphering the musty old records that told of vanished strongholds along the wall and half-forgotten ranger missions lost to history. Jaime had never been a bookish man, yet the more he listened to Sam read about the mysteries of the North, ice spiders, whites, the others, the more he found himself both skeptical and strangely compelled. One pale morning, he stood in the practice yard with his hood drawn up and his breath misting in front of him. 3 recruits sparred under his watchful eye. The first, a tall youth named Daniel, was awkward with a blade but had a quick mind for footwork. The second, Marin, boasted a stout frame and unstoppable aggression but lacked subtlety. And the third, Kell, was little more than a boy, skinny as a reed, trembling fingers on the hilt whenever he faced a live opponent. Daniel lunged, Marin parried, and Kell froze, his eyes darting between the clacking wooden swords. Jaime sighed. "Kell," he barked, "you stand there like a statue waiting to be cut down. Move your feet. There's no time for second-guessing." Kell swallowed, shifting his weight, but too late. Marin, all brash energy, pivoted and brought his practice sword around in a backhanded swing that caught Kell on the ribs. Kell yelped, stumbling into the snow. Jaime strode over, every step measured, and offered a gloved hand to the fallen boy. "Did you see what happened there?" Kell grimaced. "I froze again." "Precisely. Your instincts are good, but your fear steals your body's quickness. Next time, don't linger between decisions. Think once, then commit. Better to commit and fail than stand motionless." Marin let out a rough chuckle. "He's a craven, Sir Jaime. He'll never be a fighter." Jaime turned, leveling a hard stare at Marin. "If that's your view, you can test his mettle with real steel next time. Then see if you dare call him craven." He was seldom sharp with recruits, but Marin's sneering tone reminded him too keenly of the lords and knights in the south who had once belittled Tyrion. Jaime might have accepted the watch as his fate, but he had learned that ridicule here did more harm than good. Marin glowered, but he didn't push further. Jaime helped Kell dust himself off, then gave the boy a small nod of encouragement. "Again," he commanded. "All three of you again. This time, Kell, be the first to strike." He stepped back, letting them clash. The wooden swords thwacked in the crisp air, and fresh snow swirled at their feet. Jaime judged Daniel's footwork better, Marin's strength formidable, but Kell's reflexes sparkled with promise now that he was forced to act quickly. It reminded Jaime of how Sir Arthur Dane had once taught him, with patience and unrelenting drills. That was how skill was forged through countless, unglamorous repetitions. When the practice session ended, all three recruits were winded and red-faced from the cold, but Kell allowed himself a faint smile. He'd managed to land a blow on Daniel's flank. "Not bad," Jaime said, awarding them a nod. "Keep at it. Don't let Alice O'Thorne catch you slacking, or he'll find harsher ways to remind you." A memory tugged at Jaime, Thorne's perpetual sneer, the biting remarks that had once grated on his own pride. Over the years, Alice's disdain had cooled into a kind of grudging acceptance. Now Thorne merely circled the yard like a raven watching from a vantage, rarely interfering unless a recruit or sworn brother needed discipline. Jaime dismissed the trio, telling them to get some breakfast before the day's labor, and then he lingered alone in the yard, leaning on the wooden railing that bordered the training area. His gaze traveled upward to the glimmering flank of the wall. Icicles hung in thick clusters along the edges where the structure met the towers. The last few months had been uneventful, and that worried him. The wildlings had been surprisingly quiet, few had tried to cross, and those that did seemed to be traveling in small, desperate bands, easily pushed back. Mance Rayder, the so-called king beyond the wall, had not been sighted by any of the rangers who roved the forests. It struck Jaime as odd. Nothing stayed silent up here for long, especially not wildlings who raided or traded or both. That hush was unsettling. A strong gust of wind rattled the shutters on the keep. Jaime drew in a lungful of the biting air and decided to see if the Lord Commander would send out a fresh scouting party soon. The tension he felt might be nothing more than the old memories of war from the south, or it might be a legitimate sign. Up here, so much was guesswork, gleaned from faint traces in the snow or fleeting glimpses of footprints in the forest. An entire wildling host could be preparing to strike, and they might only discover it when the horns sounded. He made his way across the courtyard, boots crunching. He passed the armory, where Donald Noy, one-armed but skilled, was hammering out dents in a breastplate and offered a polite nod. Noy grunted his usual greeting and continued his work. Beyond that, a small group of stewards hurried from the storage cellars carrying sacks of oats and salt fish for the day's meals. Jaime admired their tireless labor. Being a steward was no easy existence, yet the watch had no place for idlers. Everyone served in some capacity. In the Lord Commander's solar, he found Gior Mormont standing by the hearth, reading a piece of parchment with deep furrows etched between his brows. A brazier glowed, giving the room a modicum of warmth. Outside the window, the mid-morning light illuminated whirling snow flurries. Mormont turned as Jaime entered, beckoning him over. "Lannister," Mormont said. He still used Jaime's house name more often than not, though there was no hostility in his tone. In all their years together, they had developed a mutual respect, even if Mormont seldom indulged in fraternizing. "I received 2 ravens this morning. One from Eastwatch, another from the Shadow Tower." Jaime waited, noticing how Mormont's gaze darkened. "Bad news, my lord?" Potentially. The wildlings have begun to cluster in small tribes near the Frostfangs, or so it seems. The rangers at the Shadow Tower spotted smoke from multiple fires in valleys that used to be deserted. And at Eastwatch, they found 3 half-frozen wildlings who claimed they were fleeing something else. They wouldn't say exactly what. Jaime remembered the old rumors of dead men, of the others, of shapes glimpsed in the snow. He wouldn't give in to superstition, but he also couldn't dismiss it. That might explain why we haven't seen them crossing south in large numbers. Perhaps they're gathering under Man's radar, or fleeing from him, Mormont countered. There are too many unknowns. I plan to send out a significant ranging bigger than the usual patrol. We'll scour the area between Castle Black and the Milkwater, glean all we can. And I want you to lead one of the squads. Jaime felt a surge of both anticipation and unease. He had commanded small patrols before, but this sounded more ambitious, more dangerous. Of course, Lord Commander. I'd be honored. Leave within 3 days. Take as many rangers as you deem fit, but travel swiftly. We'll have multiple squads going out simultaneously in different directions. If one of them runs into trouble, hopefully the others can circle around and assist. Jaime nodded, already envisioning the men he would choose. He'd want solid fighters and a tracker. I'll prepare at once. Mormont set the parchment aside, exhaling. And Lannister, be careful. Winter might be easing in the south, but up here, the worst can still come in the blink of an eye. Jaime bowed his head. Understood. He left the solar mind racing with logistics, who would handle provisions, how many horses, which route they'd take. The thought of heading beyond the wall again stirred excitement in him. After so many months of routine, he yearned for a chance to prove his worth. Still, he had learned enough caution not to welcome danger blindly. That evening, after finishing the day's chores, he convened with several of the more seasoned rangers in the dimly lit common hall. The smell of boiled onions and pepper broth hung in the air, and the roar of the hearth provided a welcome glow against the gloom. He beckoned over PYP, who had graduated from raw recruit to a capable ranger, and Gren, the broad-shouldered youth who had grown into a powerful man. A few others joined. Ed Tollett, often called Dolorous Ed for his gloomy wit, and a rangy scout named Jaren with eyes like a hawk. Samuel Tarley arrived too, though as a steward he wouldn't typically join a ranging that might involve combat. Yet Sam had grown braver in his own way and had occasionally ventured beyond the wall if it meant aiding in cartography or record-keeping. Jaime laid out the Lord Commander's plan, 3 or 4 squads, each venturing into a different swath of territory. Their group would head northwest, cutting across the foothills of the Frostfangs, then follow the Milkwater's meandering path. PYP's eyes widened, but he nodded eagerly. Gren grinned, flexing a thick hand. Ed mumbled that they might all die in the snow, but if it was Mormont's will, so be it. Sam, however, wrung his hands. Do you really need me? I'm not much of a fighter. We need your mind, Sam, Jaime said gently. There are old ruins in that region, abandoned watchposts from Century. Years ago. We might discover old records or signs. You'll know how to interpret them better than any of us. Besides, we'll keep you safe. Sam still looked pale, but some resolve shone in his eyes. All right. If I can help, I'll go. In the days that followed, they prepared meticulously. Rations were packed, dried meat, hard biscuits, onions, and whatever else could be carried easily. Warm cloaks were layered over boiled leather or chain mail, and the stable hands selected hardy Garans, small northern horses accustomed to deep snow. Alistair Thorne scowled at the bustle in the courtyard but offered no objection. He knew the mission had Mormont's blessing. For his part, Jaime triple-checked every detail. He refused to lead men into danger ill-prepared. When the morning of departure arrived, a thin, wan sunlight broke over the horizon. The courtyard thrummed with the shuffle of men, the clang of saddles, the puffs of the horses' steaming breath. Mormont himself came to see them off, as did Bowen Marsh, the first steward who admonished them not to waste or lose their supplies. Mormont clapped Jaime's shoulder, gaze firm. Return with knowledge or not at all, Lannister. We'll do both, Jaime replied with a small grin, then hoisted himself into the saddle. He looked over the group. They were 15 in total, a mixture of rangers and a couple of stewards, with Sam among them. He nodded and they rode out under the groaning gate into the vast whiteness beyond. For the first few days, the journey went smoothly. Snow crunched under the horses' hooves and the trees were laden with fresh powder. The men bantered softly, keeping spirits high. PYP entertained them with a story of how he once tried to juggle 3 daggers in front of a crowd in Bravos before he'd been caught for theft. Gren teased Sam about his squeamishness around blood. Sam, in turn, recounted some obscure bit of history about the first men that had their eyes glazing. Now and then, Jaime urged them to hush, reminding them that the wilds had ears. But the mood remained light, as if they were on a simple excursion rather than a potential foray into the unknown. They followed the winding path of old ranger trails, occasionally crossing half-frozen streams and forging through drifts that reached the horses' bellies. At night, they made camp in the lee of rocky outcroppings, building carefully shielded fires to keep from drawing too much attention. They posted double watches. Jaime took the midnight shift more than once, scanning the blackness of the forest for movement. An owl's cry would echo, or a branch would snap under the weight of ice, but no threat emerged. On the fourth day, they crested a ridge that overlooked a broad valley. Far to the west, the jagged peaks of the Frost Fangs loomed under a bleach-white sky. Sam reined his horse beside Jaime, brow furrowed. "There should be a ruin near here," he said. "An old holdfast from the time of Queen Alisanne's visit. Maybe we can find shelter or clues." Jaime nodded, leading them down a gentle slope. Late that afternoon, the party spied crumbling stone walls in the distance, half buried in snowdrifts. Drawn closer, they realized it was little more than a single tower, collapsed on one side, with shards of stone scattered like broken teeth. The wind whistled through the empty windows and old timbers jutted from the rubble. They approached cautiously, swords half-drawn. Jaren dismounted to scout. He found no sign of recent footprints, no smoke, no living soul. "Deserted for ages," he reported, the words muffled by his scarf. "But it's somewhat sheltered on the lee side." They decided to camp in the partial courtyard, hoping the ruined walls would block the worst of the wind. While the others set up tents and built a small fire, Sam ventured inside the tower remains, carefully stepping around fallen beams. Jaime followed with a torch, the orange glow flickering across frost-covered stones. Sam ran his fingers along the walls, searching for any carvings or markings. "Aha," he muttered suddenly, crouching near a cluster of half-obliterated letters. "It's an old form of the common tongue from around the time of King Jaehaerys. Hard to make out." He squinted, lips moving as he tried to interpret the script. Jaime held the torch higher, scanning the dim interior. The roof had collapsed, letting in a portion of the sky, but the walls formed a hollow chamber that resonated with the wind's mournful song. Loose flakes of snow swirled along the flagstones. "Anything useful?" Jaime asked quietly. Sam frowned. "Most of it is worn away. Something about a threat beyond the mountains. A mention of watchers in the wood. Possibly wildlings or something else. The rest is too eroded." Jaime ran a gloved hand over the rough stone, imagining the men who once stood here. Rangers of old, perhaps, or local folk who found no safety south of the wall. Each generation faced its own terrors. He nodded for Sam to keep what notes he could, then led him back outside where the fire crackled and the tents were already pitched. They ate a simple meal of dried beef and hot broth, watching the sunset bleed pink and gold across the western sky. The cold pressed in as darkness fell, and the men drew closer to the flames. PYP told a body story to ease the tension, and Jaren recounted the time he saw a giant from afar near a massive gorge. Sam, wearing double layers of wool, wrote some quick lines on a bit of parchment, documenting the partial inscription. Jaime took the first watch with Gren. The night air slashed through them, and they paced the perimeter of the ruined walls, trying to keep warm. Overhead, the stars burned fiercely, and the moon cast silver onto the snowdrifts. For a time, neither man spoke, each lost in his own watchfulness. At last Gren murmured, "Strange, being out here. I remember being terrified when we first arrived at Castle Black. Now it's almost more comforting than traveling these wilds." Jaime nodded. "Castle Black can feel like home after a while. Even the gloom has its familiarity." His thoughts strayed to the south, to the home he had lost, but that feeling of longing had grown distant. The want for Casterly Rock or King's Landing was just a memory now. His life belonged here, in these stark and savage lands. Nothing disturbed them that night. The next morning, they set off again, forging deeper into the wilderness. Snow began to fall steadily, obscuring their path. By midday, the wind rose, blowing the flakes horizontally and cutting off visibility. Jaime pressed on, mindful of the need to find better shelter before nightfall. By chance, they stumbled upon a ravine that offered some respite from the storm. Tall pines clung to the slopes, forming a canopy that caught the brunt of the snow. They decided to halt there. As they unrolled bedrolls and fed the horses, PYP approached Jaime, eyes narrowed against the swirling flakes. "Look up there," he said, pointing. Jaime followed his gaze. Along the ridge above them, a dark shape moved between the trees. He stiffened, hand going to the hilt of his sword. The shape flickered out of sight, then reappeared a moment later. Person. Possibly more than one. Quietly, Jaime beckoned the others. "Stay sharp," he said. He wasn't eager to provoke a fight. Not in these conditions. But if there were wildlings watching from above, better to address it than wait for an ambush. They prepared weapons, though Sam fumbled nervously with his dagger. Jaime led Jaren, Gren, and PYP up the slope, leaving Ed Tollett in charge of those below. The climb was slippery, the snowdrifts waist-deep in places. Branches snagged at them. Twice, Jaime lost his footing on hidden rocks, but he forced himself onward. When they neared the ridge, he signaled Jaren to circle wide. Gren lumbered behind Jaime, breath steaming. They moved quietly as possible until they reached a vantage that looked down upon a shallow hollow. There, in a cluster of pines, they saw half a dozen figures, wildlings, by their furs and mismatched gear. They had no tents, just makeshift lean-tos. The wind had partially buried them in white drifts. One was crouched near a tiny fire, coaxing it with shaking hands. Jaime pressed himself behind a tree, motioning for the others to stay still. He counted the shapes carefully. 6, possibly more in hiding, though none were evident. They looked starved and desperate. A child huddled near the fire, 2, no older than 10 or so. One of the wildlings coughed wetly, drawing a ragged blanket closer. He waited, debating. If they confronted them openly, the wildlings might attack out of fear or desperation. But leaving them unchallenged could pose a risk if they were scouts for a larger group. He also recalled Mormont's directive: gather information. These 6 might know what was happening farther north. He signaled Jaren to circle around, approach from the far side. Then Jaime and Gren stepped into view, swords out but angled downward in a gesture of caution. PYP hung back, arrow nocked. The wildlings jerked upright, eyes wide. One scrambled for a spear, while 2 others brandished knives. The child yelped and curled into a ball. "Hold!" Jaime shouted over the wind. "We don't seek blood. We're from the Night's Watch." A wiry woman with a tangle of gray-streaked hair spat. "Crows." She lunged, but the man beside her, his beard white with frost, grabbed her arm. "Stop," the bearded man rasped. "Stop. We can't fight them." His gaze flicked to Jaime's sword. "You want us gone? We'll go." "We want answers," Jaime said. "Who are you? Why are you here, so close to the wall?" The man coughed, a hollow sound. "We fled the Frostfangs. Most of our kin have gone north, deeper into the mountains." "Why?" Jaime pressed. "What drives you away?" The man's eyes darted to the others. The child moaned, hugging themselves. "We lost our camp. Attacks. They came at night." He swallowed hard. "Dead things walking, or so some said. I never saw them, but half our people vanished. Then Mance's men started pushing us, saying we must join him or suffer alone. We didn't want either. So we ran. We hoped to slip past the crows." Jaime exchanged a glance with Gren. The stories of walking corpses again. He wasn't sure what to believe, but fear radiated from these people. "Where is Mance Raider now?" The man shrugged, haggard eyes flicking over the snow. "Gathering more tribes to him, last I heard. Rumor says he wants them all united, building some sort of host to break the wall." He shook his head. "We want no part of that. Let the king beyond the wall do as he likes. We have a child. We just want to survive." Jaime lowered his sword another fraction. The scene before him was one of desperation, not malice. These were no raiders eager for bloodshed, they were refugees. Another wave of pity surged in him. "Have you seen any large bands heading south?" The man's face tightened. "Some. We heard rumors that a big group might try to cross at the Fist of the First Men or near the Bridge of Skulls. But I don't know if that's true. We're just trying to avoid them." Jaime considered. The Fist of the First Men was well to the north, a ring fort used sometimes by rangers as a vantage. If a significant wildling force gathered there, it was alarming news. He exhaled a long plume of breath, the wind whipping it away. "You'll freeze here," he said. "You do better returning home or seeking shelter." The woman sneered. "We have no home left. South is the only path left to us." "You can't cross the wall without risking our arrows," Jaime said gently. "But if you swear not to harm the realm, we might spare you." In truth, the Night's Watch policy was to stop all wildlings from passing, yet in practice, that wasn't always possible or even compassionate. He thought of the child. "We can't escort you, there's too few of us. But if you move east, you'll find a path to the Bay of Seals. Perhaps Eastwatch will take you in. The wildlings exchanged wary looks. They likely mistrusted every crow's word. But the bearded man's shoulders slumped in resignation. We have no fight left. We'll go east. Jaime stepped forward and pulled a small pouch from his belt. It held a portion of dried meat. He tossed it near the fire. The wildlings blinked in surprise. The woman with the tangled hair glanced between the food and Jaime, uncertain if it was a trick. At length, the bearded man scooped it up, eyes gleaming with gratitude. "Thank you." "Go," Jaime said softly. "But if you harm anyone south of the wall, we'll hunt you down. Do you understand?" A grim nod. "Aye." They began hastily gathering their scant belongings. Jaime retreated, gesturing for Jaren, PYP, and Gren to follow. He didn't want to linger. Neither did he want to watch them devour the food in a frenzy. The knowledge that wildlings wandered these woods in such dire straits tightened the knot in his stomach. Something was herding them like sheep, either Mance Raider or worse, the rumored dead men. They returned to the rest of the party in the ravine, explaining what had happened. Talit shook his head glumly. "We'll regret that, feeding them. They'll come back for more." Sam disagreed. "If they're desperate, it's better than forcing them to starve or join Mance's cause. Mercy might buy us time." He gave Jaime a look of approval, albeit tinged with worry. They broke camp the next morning, continuing onward. The landscape grew more rugged, with hills rising steeply and gullies carved by half-frozen streams. Scattered animal tracks crisscrossed their path. Twice, they spotted large paw prints that Jaren suspected belonged to a bear, though it could have been a massive direwolf. They kept weapons ready, yet encountered no beasts. In the evenings, as they set up camp, Sam and Jaime would speak quietly about the mentions of whites, walking dead throughout history. According to some old texts, Sam explained, the White Walkers were real thousands of years ago, but the others haven't been seen in centuries. Most maesters think it's myth. Jaime stared into the flames, recalling the tremor in the wildlings' voices when they spoke of attacks in the night. Myths or not, something had frightened them. "They believed it," he murmured. "I could see it in their eyes." Sam nodded. "I think there's something stirring in the far north. Even if it's not the others, there might be new terrors." He paused. "And Mance Raider, we can't ignore him. If he truly unites the wildlings, tens of thousands, some say, the Watch will be hard-pressed to hold them off." A chill deeper than the cold seeped into Jaime's bones. He remembered how, in the south, great houses spoke of the Night's Watch as a relic, an order meant to keep a handful of wildlings out. They had no concept of an entire host or of supernatural threats that might dwarf any mundane war. Part of him felt a flicker of frustration that the realm wasted resources on petty squabbles instead of bolstering the Watch. But he also knew how politics worked. The men of the South would only wake up to the danger when it crashed against their doorstep. They continued northward for several more days, encountering only bleak silence and the rising wind. The sun never offered more than a pale glow. Clouds massed overhead, pregnant with another storm. Jaime had nearly decided to turn back, suspecting they wouldn't glean more valuable information when they stumbled across fresh tracks in a narrow valley. At first, they thought them to be animal prints. Then Jaren crouched, running a hand along the edges of the impressions. "These are footprints. Boot prints, I'd wager. A fair number of them heading east." Jaime knelt beside him, scanning the churned snow. At least a dozen men, possibly more. The trail was likely a day old, blurred by drifting snow. Still, it was a sign of a significant group moving near the Milkwater, heading east, or perhaps circling around the Frost Fangs. He weighed the risk. If they followed the trail, they might catch up, but it could lead them into an ambush. On the other hand, this might be the most tangible lead they'd found so far. He decided they would follow the tracks for a day. If they found no sign of the travelers, they'd turn back. So they rode on, with Jaren scouting ahead on foot to read the snow more precisely while the rest kept their distance. The wind grew fiercer, cutting their exposed skin. Each night, they huddled under thick blankets, the men's faces pinched with cold. Sam's cheeks were red and chafed, his nose perpetually running. Still, no one complained. They were rangers of the Night's Watch. Complaints would do nothing but sap morale. By late afternoon on the second day, Jaren suddenly signaled for them to halt. He crouched near a stand of wind-bent fir trees, pointing into a shallow hollow just beyond. Jaime dismounted quietly, creeping forward to peer between the trunks. There, nestled against an outcrop of rock, was a campsite recently abandoned. The ashes of a fire remained, still faintly warm. Several pairs of footprints led away. Likely a large party of wildlings or perhaps deserters from the watch, though that latter possibility seemed slimmer. Could be Mance Raydo's scouts, Jaren whispered. Jaime scanned the small clearing, noting scattered bones and scraps. He caught a faint whiff of something foul, rotted meat, perhaps. He saw no bodies, no blood, but there was an unsettling sense that the occupants had left in a hurry. They're close, Jaime said. We should move carefully. He motioned for the group to fan out along the tree line, staying low and silent. They inched forward, scanning the horizon for movement. The light was already dimming, the sky a molten pewter. A hush blanketed the forest. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then a sharp whistle cut through the silence, a signal. Jaime froze, heart pounding. The whistle came from somewhere behind them. They wheeled around, swords flashing. Suddenly, figures emerged among the firs, clad in ragged furs, spears and axes raised. More wildlings than Jaime could count at once. At least 20, maybe 30. They had circled behind them with lethal stealth. Form up! Jaime shouted, but the wildlings were already moving in. Weapons glinted dully in the weak daylight. The rangers pressed back to back, forming a small defensive ring near the campsite. PYP raised his bow, loosing an arrow that took one wildling in the shoulder. The man fell with a cry. Another volley of arrows came from the wildling's side, one thudding off Gren's shield, another slicing through a steward's coat. Sam huddled behind a fallen log, shaking but clutching a shortbow. Ed Tollett muttered a litany of pessimistic curses as he drew his sword. Jaime brandished his blade with calm determination, scanning for a chance to parley or break free. But the wildlings pressed closer, forming a semicircle of steel and rage. He counted at least 6 archers, perched behind trees, arrows nocked. One tall wildling with braided hair stepped forward, hefting an axe. Crows, he roared. Lay down your steel or die. Jaime's mind raced. Surrender would mean captivity, possibly torture or ransom. Yet fighting so many might be a death sentence. The rangers had some skill on their side, but the wildlings had overwhelming numbers. Is Mance Raydo among you? Jaime called, stalling. Not here, the man growled. Doesn't matter. We found you and we'll kill you. The king beyond the wall wants no crows spying on his land. Behind Jaime, Sam trembled, trying to string his bow. Jaren and PYP exchanged grim looks. Gren shifted his stance, ready to charge if needed. Jaime was about to respond when an arrow flew from the side, embedding in the tall wildling's leg. He howled, dropping to one knee. The shot had come from Sam, though Sam looked as startled as anyone, as if he couldn't believe he'd actually hit his mark. That moment of chaos was all it took. Jaime seized it, shouting, "Rally! Fight or die!" He surged forward, slashing at the nearest wildling. The rest of the rangers erupted into motion, steel clanging. The wildlings let out a savage cry, converging like wolves around prey. For an instant it was chaos, snow kicked up in plumes, men yelling, steel on steel. Jaime parried a spear thrust, ducked beneath another wildling's swing, and countered with a slash that tore through hide armor. Blood spattered across the snow. He felt the old thrill of battle flood his veins, but he also knew they were badly outnumbered. An arrow hissed by, grazing his shoulder. The pain flared hot, but he pressed on. He saw PYP go down under the weight of 2 wildlings, though he managed to skewer one with his dagger before Gren yanked the second off him with brute force. They were surrounded, pinned. More wildlings poured in from the trees, cutting off any path of retreat. Ed Tollett fought beside Jaren, stoic in the face of certain doom. Sam fired another arrow wildly, missing, then fumbled for a third. The steward next to him took an axe blow to the neck and went down without a sound. Another arrow lodged in the trunk behind Jaime, vibrating with lethal force. A savage-faced man lunged at Jaime from the side, a curved blade whistling. Jaime barely had time to pivot, blocking the strike at an awkward angle. He lashed out, his sword biting into the wildling's side. The man collapsed, shrieking. But immediately another attacker replaced him, this one a broad woman with a spear that she jabbed at Jaime's midsection. He twisted away, nearly losing his footing on the slick ground. She snarled and lunged again, forcing him to retreat a step. In that instant, Jaime glimpsed Sam cornered by 2 wildlings. Sam was backing away, terrified, holding his bow like a club. The largest wildling had a notched axe, raising it high. Jaime's instincts roared a warning. If Sam was struck, he'd be cut in half. Jaime feinted at the spearwoman, then whirled, ignoring the vulnerable angle he left himself at. He dashed through the swirling snow, planting his boot on a stump to vault over a fallen tree. The big wildling's axe was already descending toward Sam's head. Jaime hurled himself into the path of the blow, sword raised in a desperate parry. The axe met steel with a jarring impact that nearly tore the sword from his grip. He gritted his teeth, pivoting to deflect. The axe slid off, striking the ground. In the same heartbeat, Jaime thrust upward with every ounce of strength, driving his blade into the wildling's chest. The man gasped, eyes bulging, then toppled. Sam gaped at Jaime, pale as milk. Jaime offered him a grim nod, then tore his sword free. No time to exchange words. The spearwoman was on them, along with two more. Jaime cursed. They were pinned a few yards from the others. He braced himself for the rush. Suddenly, a horn sounded from the west, a long, echoing blast that made both sides falter. Jaime had never heard that horn before, deep as the earth's groan. The wildlings exchanged startled looks. Another blast followed, vibrating the air. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then chaos again, but of a different sort. Some of the wildlings cried out in alarm, turning away from the fight. Others stared at the treeline, uncertain. Jaime didn't wait to ponder. He seized the advantage, lunging at the spearwoman, forcing her back. She stumbled, and Sam, astonishingly, smacked her in the side of the head with his bow, sending her sprawling. Nearby, Jaren and Ed redoubled their efforts, cutting down a wildling who was wavering in confusion. PYP, bloodied but standing, fired an arrow into another. The rest of the wildlings, disoriented by the horn, started to fall back in fear, or perhaps to regroup. Fall in. Jaime roared to his men, pushing forward. They hacked their way toward the clearing's edge. Arrows hissed around them, but fewer than before. Jaime spared a glance behind him, counting how many rangers still lived. He counted at least 9 out of their original 15. A glance up ahead showed figures emerging on the ridge, men clad not in black, but in patchwork leathers and furs. Wildlings? Or something else? A voice boomed above the commotion. Hold, dogs. Hold, or I'll let loose again. The wildlings around Jaime froze, turning in shock. Jaime paused, sword at the ready, chest heaving. From the ridge strode a man with an imposing build, wearing a heavy fur cloak. His face was shadowed by a hood. More men fanned out behind him, armed with bows, swords, spears. At least 24. They were not wearing the black of the watch, yet they were clearly disciplined, standing in formation behind their leader. One of the wildlings near Jaime called out, "Who the bloody hell are you?" The newcomer pulled back his hood. He was older, hair streaked with gray, his face craggy like the mountains. "We serve the Storm King now," he declared in a resonant voice. "And by King Stannis' command, we arrest any who would cross the border unbidden." A murmur rippled through his ranks as they raised weapons, pointed at the wildlings. Jaime felt his heart skip. Stannis Baratheon? King Stannis? He knew Robert Baratheon had taken the throne after the rebellion, but Stannis was Robert's brother, rumored to be a master of ships at Dragonstone, or so the last news Jaime had heard from the south. Had something changed? The words, "We serve the Storm King," rattled him. Was there a new conflict in the realm? The war had supposedly ended years ago. Perhaps it was just these men's misguided moniker for Robert's line. Yet the man had said Stannis, not Robert. Before Jaime could make sense of it, the newly arrived soldiers descended the slope with disciplined efficiency, forming a cordon around both the wildlings and Jaime's battered band. The wildlings, already rattled, seemed uncertain whether to resist. Their leader, the tall man with an arrow in his leg, cursed and bellowed. "We're free folk. No Southern king commands us." He tried to rally his people, but many looked ready to flee. The older man who had spoken repeated, "Lay down your arms or face the consequences." His men began to shout for the wildlings to submit. Chaos teetered on a knife's edge. Jaime, standing near Sam, recognized that if a melee broke out now, they'd be caught in the middle. They had lost a third of their rangers in the fight already. They could not afford another pitched battle against fresh troops. Gren, breathing heavily, murmured, "Sir Jaime, what do we do?" Jaime grimaced. He had no desire to fight these newcomers. "We stand down," he said. "We're men of the Night's Watch. Maybe we can reason with them." His voice carried enough authority that the battered rangers lowered their weapons, though they remained on guard. The older man's gaze snapped to Jaime. "Night's Watch, are you? From Castle Black?" Jaime inclined his head. "Yes. I'm Jaime Lannister, a sworn brother of the Watch. We came north on Lord Commander Mormont's orders." "Who are you, and why do you speak of King Stannis?" The man approached, stepping through the churned snow. His soldiers parted to let him pass, maintaining their formation. "I am Ser Colmar Wild, in service to the rightful king of Westeros, Stannis of House Baratheon." We ventured north to deal with the wildling threat and to investigate rumors of dark magic beyond the wall. Stannis, the rightful king? Jaime repeated, baffled. Robert Baratheon sits the Iron Throne, last I knew. Something flickered in Wild's expression, anger, maybe, or resolve. King Robert is dead. So is Joffrey. Lord Renly tried to claim the throne, but he fell. Stannis stands now as the rightful heir by all the laws of succession. Yet the boy Tommen sits the throne in King's Landing, propped up by Lannisters. He spat. Treason and folly. We ride to gather strength in the north. Some at Castle Black support us. A man named Jon Snow. Heard of him? Jaime felt the ground tilt beneath him. Robert dead? Joffrey, who must have been Robert's heir, also dead. A boy named Tommen on the throne, propped up by Lannisters? He thought of Cersei's children. That meant... The timeline in his mind reeled. He had received almost no fresh news from the South for well over a year, possibly two. The wheels of Southern politics had turned drastically. The name Jon Snow rang a faint bell, a bastard of Eddard Stark, if Jaime remembered rightly. But how had everything come to this? He wrestled with a surge of conflicting emotions. The realm had changed beyond recognition. Yet he was still sworn to the Watch, and neutrality was his vow. We've heard no tidings of these events, he said carefully. We are loyal to our oath alone, not to any king. We're here to investigate the wildlings. Wild studied him. Then you're not our enemy. Nor do we wish a quarrel with the Night's Watch. Our purpose is to gather any free folk who will bend the knee to Stannis, spare them from the white monsters said to roam the depths of winter. We already fought some at Harhome. He shuddered. Whites. Dead men walking. The rumors are true. At that, Jaime felt a chill. He glanced at Sam, who looked equally shaken. So it wasn't just the wildlings telling tales. You've encountered them? Aye, and worse. Stannis lost good men there. Wild paused, his stern facade betraying a flicker of horror. We heard Castle Black might ally with the rightful king, or at least share a common cause. This land must unite to fight the real threat. The others are on the move, Lannister. The name felt strange, spoken by a man who believed House Lannister to be the seat of treachery. Jaime forced his voice steady. All we know is that we must defend the realms of men from anything that arises from beyond the wall. If your king means to do the same, I expect you'll find a welcome ear with Lord Commander Mormont. But we cannot speak for him. One of Wild's men stepped forward, eyeing the wildlings still milling about. Sire, what do we do with these savages? The big wildling with an arrow in his leg spat blood and attempted to stand, but collapsed. His fellows seemed torn between defending him and fleeing. Wild lifted a hand to stay any further hostilities. If they'll yield to Stannis, they may pass. Otherwise, they can freeze or die. We've no mercy left for the defiant. Jaime observed the wildlings, some half-dead from cold. He knew the Watch's stance. The free folk could never be allowed South End Mass without the Watch's oversight. But these men served a different purpose, some new political angle that threatened to overshadow the real crisis. He realized that with every passing moment, the swirling storm of events in the South was drifting north. Soon, the Watch might stand at a crossroads again. At length, Wild turned back to Jaime. Your men are injured. We have a camp not far from here, better provisions. Come with us. We'll see your wounds tended. Jaime hesitated. The last time men of the Night's Watch had relied on knights from the south for aid, it had been at the wall with King Robert's support. But times had changed. We appreciate the offer. We lost men in the fight, and some are badly wounded. If your intentions are honest, we'll accompany you. But you must promise us safe passage back to Castle Black. Wild gave a curt nod. Agreed. I swear it on my honor as a knight. He gestured to his men. Help the crows gather their dead. We'll bury them properly. Then, with a meaningful glance at the battered wildlings, you lot can come too, if you mean to live. Bend the knee to Stannis or remain in the cold. Even as Wild spoke, several wildlings stumbled away into the trees, unwilling to yield. Others dropped their weapons, lacking the strength to resist. Jaime watched in a daze, mind spinning with the knowledge that the realm was in turmoil again. Another war, another king. Or kings. And White Walkers, he couldn't ignore that. His vow compelled him to the defense of the realm, no matter who sat the throne. He sheathed his sword with a sense of foreboding. They gathered their wounded and dead as best they could, hearts heavy. PYP was alive, though bleeding from multiple cuts. Jaren had an arrow lodged in his thigh that needed tending. For men had been killed outright, their bodies limp in the snow. Jaime knelt by each fallen brother for a moment, honoring them with a silent vow that they would be remembered. Sam hovered nearby, tears in his eyes as he offered a trembling prayer to the old gods, or maybe the seven, Jaime wasn't sure. The swirl of snow muffled the living and dead alike. Once they had done what they could, they followed Wild's company westward. The trek was slow, with PYP leaning on Gren, Jaren limping painfully, and others supporting each other. Darkness fell quickly, forcing them to rely on torches. The newcomers led them through a winding pass into a secluded hollow. There, tents clustered in a makeshift encampment ringed by sharpened stakes. Torches flickered, revealing wagons, horses, and men wrapped in cloaks bearing a stag banner with a flaming heart. Jaime blinked, recognizing House Baratheon's sigil combined with the red heart of the Lord of Light. That was Melisandre's symbol, if memory served. So Stannis had turned to Lawler? The swirl of half-forgotten rumors about a red priestess whispered in Jaime's mind. Wild barked orders and men rushed to help the newly arrived rangers. Sam exhaled in relief as a healer took charge of Jaren, extracting the arrow from his thigh while PYP was seated near a brazier to warm up. Jaime scanned the camp. He counted at least 100 armed soldiers, some in partial plate, others in leather jerkins, all bearing that curious Stag Anhart insignia. He overheard snatches of conversation, talk of King's Landing, of a siege at Winterfell, of the Boltons, of dragons rumored to be across the narrow sea. It was as though the entire realm had appended in the years of Jaime's isolation. He felt unsteady, trying to piece it together. A grizzled soldier approached. "Sir Jaime Lannister, is it?" His voice was curt, edged with wariness. "I'm to take you to Sir Colmar's tent. He wants to speak more." Jaime nodded. "Lead on." He cast a last glance at Sam and the others. "Stay together," he advised them quietly. "We don't know these men." They nodded, exhaustion etched on their faces. Sir Colmar Wild's tent was larger than the rest, lit by a brazier inside. Maps of the north were pinned to a makeshift table alongside messages scrawled on parchment. A tall woman with close-cropped hair stood by Wild's side, frowning at Jaime. Wild waved him in, crossing his arms. "Lannister," Wild said, "we need to speak plainly. If you're truly the Jaime Lannister we've heard of, son of Tywin Lannister, father of the boy King Tommen, then you have ties to the usurpers who currently hold King's Landing." Jaime nearly corrected him about Tommen being his nephew, but that was a truth he could never openly voice. He swallowed. "I've been in the Night's Watch for many years now, Sir Colmar. I have renounced all claim to any house or child. My vow is my only loyalty." The woman at Wild's side spoke, voice cool. "You mean you have no interest in whether House Lannister or House Baratheon rules?" Jaime nodded once. "That's correct. My oath is to defend the realm from threats beyond the wall. If your king is determined to help in that cause, then we share a common enemy." Wild studied him a moment as if gauging his honesty. "Stannis has come north for exactly that reason. The realm squabbles over the Iron Throne while the true danger marches from the far north. We aim to unify the free folk, rally the northern lords, and hold the wall against the others. But we are few and the watch is scattered. For that, we need alliances. We need Mormont or whomever now commands the watch to cooperate." "Mormont still commands," Jaime said. "He'll hear you out, but the Night's Watch does not take sides in the wars of the Seven Kingdoms. That is an oath as old as the watch itself." Wild rubbed his temples. "A delicate matter, yes. But these are not ordinary times. The dead are rising. The White Walkers are real. Even the great lords will kneel if it means survival. So we'll see whether Mormont clings to neutrality or joins us to save Westeros." Jaime's jaw tightened. He understood the sense of Wild's words, yet the Watch's neutrality was sacrosanct. "We can share knowledge, fight side by side against the others, but we cannot pledge ourselves to a claimant to the throne. That is the vow." Wild's gaze hardened. "We'll see. In the meantime, rest. My maesters," he caught himself, clearing his throat. "My healers will tend your wounded. When the weather lifts, we'll escort you back to Castle Black. I'm sure your Lord Commander will be eager for news." Jaime inclined his head, not wanting to argue further. A part of him was relieved at the promise that they'd be allowed to leave. "Thank you. My men have no quarrel with yours." He turned to go, but Wild's next words froze him. "Be aware, if you were to pledge your sword to Stannis, he might forgive your father's crimes. You'd have a place in the new order. Even your vow to the watch could be set aside with a royal decree if you so wished." Jaime exhaled slowly. Once those words might have tempted him. Now they only stirred a weary sense of resignation. "I made my choice long ago," he said. "I keep my vows." Without further discussion, he left the tent. Outside, the snow still fell, though calmer now. Fires burned around the camp, men huddling close. Horses stamped their hooves, steam rising from their flanks. Jaime noticed a group of wildlings penned off to the side, likely the ones who had chosen to bend the knee. They looked miserable but alive. Others from Wild's band patrolled with watchful eyes. Tension pervaded the air as if one spark could ignite bloodshed. He found Sam and the others gathered around a small fire. Jaren's leg had been bandaged. He leaned against Gren for support. PYP, his cut stitched, nodded in greeting. Ed Tollett offered one of his signature sighs. We're among new friends now, oh joy. Each one with a sharpened blade and a heart full of suspicion. Jaime forced a wry smile. We'll manage. They're taking us to Castle Black once the storm eases. Sam's eyes flickered with relief. Good. These men talk openly about horrifying battles with whites. I overheard them mention some red priestess who sets the dead on fire. It's all so overwhelming. I never knew the situation in the south had grown so dire. Jaime stared into the crackling flames. Nor did I. The news of Robert's death, Joffrey's death, Tommen on the throne, a new war, he couldn't begin to parse how it had all played out or what had happened to Cersei. But even that pang had dulled over the years, replaced by acceptance that he would never again be part of that world. There was only the North and his vow. They passed 2 tense days in the camp waiting out a fierce storm. Snow piled high around the tents, forcing them to dig out paths each morning. Wild's men eyed Jaime's group with open curiosity, but there was no hostility save a few sneers at the name Lannister. Jaime responded coolly, ignoring the insults. He'd grown accustomed to jibes at his surname long ago. On the third morning, the wind calmed and the sky emerged, pale and brittle. Ser Colmar Wild ordered the camp to break down. They would journ. Why south and east, aiming to circle back to the wall at Castle Black. The watchmen gathered their gear and said quiet farewells to the handful of soldiers who had shown them kindness. Then they set out, forging new tracks in the fresh snowfall. The journey was arduous, slowed by wounded men. Still, with Wild's larger force, they weren't harried by wildlings. Jaime noticed how the presence of so many well-armed soldiers made traveling simpler. Fear, he realized, was a powerful deterrent. Near midday, they came across the bodies of several wildlings half-buried in a drift, their limbs stiff with frost. Wild's men approached cautiously, worried they might rise as whites. But they did not stir, not yet, so they were burned on a pyre. The acrid smoke stung at Jaime's nostrils. He recalled stories that the only sure way to keep a corpse from rising was fire or dragaglass. Each funeral pyre hammered home the unnatural horror creeping closer. At last, they reached the southern edge of the Milkwater Valley. The climb onto the plateau near the wall was relentless, the path riddled with ice. Men and horses slipped, cursing. Wild pressed them onward with urgent determination. The man seemed eager to meet with Mormont. Then, on the eve of the second day of climbing, they spotted a distant glow in the sky. A faint orange haze on the northern horizon where the wall should stand. Jaime's heart constricted with dread. Fire at Castle Black? Some incursion? Wild squinted at the ominous glow. Could be a wildfire. Or a large torchlight along the ramparts. Jaime shook his head. Impossible to say from here. But anxiety gnawed at him. He led the rangers forward as quickly as the terrain allowed, ignoring the exhaustion of battered limbs. By the time they drew close enough to see the wall's looming silhouette, dusk had fallen and the glow flickered sullenly against the underside of the clouds. Their group paused on a ridge. Torchlight glimmered from Castle Black's courtyard, but the gates looked intact. The ominous glow seemed to be coming from the northern side of the wall, perhaps near the forest. Wild's men grumbled uncertainties, but Jaime spurred his horse onward, descending the slope. The wind howled across the open ground that stretched between them and the wall. No alarm horns sounded from Castle Black. That was either good or terribly bad. When they arrived at the gate, black-cloaked sentries challenged them, clearly startled by the presence of so many armed Southerners. Jaime called out, "We are Rangers of the Night's Watch, returning with guests." A moment of tense silence, then the gates swung open with the groaning of old wood. Torches revealed the wary faces of fellow crows. Alliser Thorne stood there, flanked by Bowen Marsh and a group of stewards. Relief flickered in Thorne's eyes when he saw Jaime and the survivors. "Back from the dead, are you?" "I should have wagered coin," Thorne muttered, though it lacked his usual venom. Bowen Marsh frowned at Wild and his retinue. "Who in the seven hells are these men?" Jaime dismounted stiffly, pain jarring his body. "They're soldiers of Stannis Baratheon. I'll explain everything. Where's Lord Commander Mormont?" A shadow passed over Marsh's face. "He's at the top of the wall with Jon Snow and a party of knights. Some massive fire burns out beyond the forest. They've been watching it for hours, debating if it's a signal or an attack. We feared the wildlings had set the woods aflame." Jaime exchanged a glance with Wild, who looked grim. "We should see for ourselves." They left the horses in the courtyard. Wild took a handful of his men. while the rest waited below, uncertain of their reception. It was a surreal sight. These red-heart Baratheon soldiers stepping onto Night's Watch territory. Tension coiled in the courtyard, Black brothers eyeing the newcomers with suspicion. Jaime beckoned Sam and a few others to follow. Then they ascended the stairs toward the top of the wall. The climb was long and punishing for those weary from travel, but adrenaline pushed them onward. At the top, the wind struck them like a blade. Torches flickered fitfully. There, standing near the icy parapet, was Lord Commander Jeor Mormont, clad in black fur, a spyglass in hand. Beside him stood Jon Snow, young, dark-haired, with a hard set to his mouth, and several other brothers. Mormont turned as Jaime approached. "Lannister," Mormont rumbled, relief laced with anger. "We feared you dead when you didn't return." "Close enough," Jaime said wryly. "We ran into a large wildling force. Lost men." He inhaled. "And we found these soldiers. They serve Stannis Baratheon." He stepped aside, letting Wild come forward. The older knight bowed stiffly to Mormont, who surveyed him with suspicion. "Lord Commander, I am Ser Colmar Wild, sent to treat with the Night's Watch on behalf of King Stannis." Mormont grunted. "We'll talk of that soon enough." He gestured to the horizon. "Look for yourself." He thrust the spyglass at Wild. Wild peered through it, eyes widening at what he saw. Jaime stepped to the edge, squinting. Across the dark sea of trees, flickers of orange and yellow lit the sky, as if an enormous fire raged somewhere far beyond the first ridges of forest. The light wavered and danced, revealing billowing smoke whenever the wind parted the clouds. A sense of primal dread welled up in Jaime's chest. Was this Mance Raiders' doing, or something else? "They've been lighting great pyres out there," Jon Snow said quietly, voice as cold as the wind. "We're not sure if it's a gathering signal for the free folk, or if the others have forced them to burn their dead. The Watch Scouts can't get close enough to know." Wild lowered the spyglass, face grave. "Then we arrived at a crucial hour. King Stannis means to ride forth with men loyal to him, to break Mance Raiders' host, if he can. If Mance has chosen to muster at those fires, we'll meet him in battle." Mormont's expression hardened. "We have too few rangers to repel that many wildlings alone. So, if your king truly intends to help, perhaps we should hear him out." A swirl of wind carried ice crystals past them, reflecting the distant glow like tiny sparks in the night. Jaime stood there, feeling the creeping weight of what loomed. Tens of thousands of wildlings might be gathering, the others might be on the move, and the southern kings were at war among themselves. Yet in this moment, those concerns converged on the wall. It was no longer just about a personal vow or a father's ambition, it was about survival. He watched Mormont and Wild exchange words, each aware of the magnitude of what lay beyond those fires. Alliser Thorne came up behind them, sneering at the presence of more southerners, but he held his tongue when he saw the gravity on everyone's faces. Jon Snow, silent and intense, studied Wild with an unreadable expression. Sam huddled at the back, eyes wide, his breath pluming. "Lannister," Mormont said abruptly, turning. "We'll need your counsel. You've been beyond the wall more than most, and now you've met these new allies. If Stannis truly means to help us hold the line, I'll not turn him away. But we must tread carefully. The Watch cannot become a plaything of southern politics." Jaime nodded. "I stand ready to advise you, my lord." Mormont lifted his gaze to the dancing flames on the horizon. "Then let us see what dawn brings. If it's war, we'll fight. If it's negotiation, we'll talk. The realm expects the Night's Watch to stand guard, no matter the storms that rage." Wild nodded agreement, though a flicker of tension remained in his eyes. "Then at daybreak, we ride forth or parley, whatever is needed. I only pray we're not too late." The others do not wait for men to decide. Jaime gripped the icy parapet, the cold biting into his gloves. Below, Castle Black stretched in silent expectation, and beyond, the forest flickered with unnatural fire. He felt the presence of looming forces far greater than any personal conflict. In that moment, he welcomed the sense of purpose for all his misgivings. He was a sworn brother of the Night's Watch, this was his battlefield, and the stakes were nothing less than life and death for all the living. He found himself recalling, with a distant pang, the day Tywin Lannister had exiled him to these black cloaks. The day he had lost everything he thought he wanted. Yet here, at the top of the world, he might serve a higher purpose than he ever could have in the south. He drew in a breath of frigid air, letting it steady him. Somewhere out there, an army burned great beacons in the night, and the dead might walk. He would stand his ground, sword in hand, for as long as breath remained in his body. The hours crawled by intense vigil. Men paced the ramparts, occasionally peering through spyglasses to see if the fire had spread or if any new shapes moved against the glow. The smoke churned ominously, sometimes brightening as though stoked by new fuel. Jaime descended around midnight to snatch a few hours of restless sleep. He found Sam, eyes rimmed with exhaustion, still awake in the common hall, scribbling notes by candlelight. "Sam, you should rest," Jaime murmured. "I can't," Sam said, voice trembling. "I keep thinking about Harhome, how those men said the whites attacked. They might come for us too." Jaime sat beside him, ignoring his own weariness. "If they do, we'll fight them. There's no use in fear." Sam exhaled shakily. "Easy for you to say. You're good with the sword. I just freeze up. But if what Ser Wild's men said is true, we'll need more than steel. We'll need dragonglass. Maybe Valyrian steel. Fire, certainly." Jaime placed a reassuring hand on Sam's shoulder. "You're braver than you think, Sam. You saved my life out there with that arrow. Remember that." Sam flushed, then tried to smile. "I suppose. But I'd still rather be reading." Jaime chuckled softly. "Read all you want, so long as you keep your eyes open for threats." He stood, stretching. "Get some rest if you can. The dawn might bring madness." At last, he sank onto a pallet near the hearth, letting exhaustion claim him. He dreamed fitfully of the wall collapsing in a roar of ice, thousands of shambling corpses pouring through, bearing torches that glowed with the same sickly light he had seen across the forest. In the dream, Tywin stood atop a heap of gold, mocking him for failing his vow. Jaime awoke drenched in cold sweat, heart hammering. The hearth's embers had burned low, and only a handful of men snored in the gloom. He rubbed his face, trying to dispel the lingering dread. When dawn arrived, a pale, colorless glow seeped into the sky. He left the common hall to find Mormont and Wild in the courtyard, deep in discussion with Jon Snow. They were plotting how best to approach the flaming forest. A large party would set out, a mix of Night's Watch Rangers and Wild's mounted knights, to investigate. Jaime insisted on joining them. He had led men beyond the wall before, he knew the terrain as well as any. Mormont consented. Thus they prepared horses again, donning heavier cloaks and ensuring weapons were sharpened. More dragonglass daggers were distributed, courtesy of Sam, who had discovered a small cache some time ago. The gates opened and they rode forth, around 50 strong, 20 Black brothers, including Jaime, and 30 or so Baratheon soldiers. Jon Snow came as well, cloaked in a thick wolfskin, a sort of Valyrian steel at his hip called Long Claw, so the rumor went. Mormont remained behind at Castle Black to coordinate the defense should they need to retreat. They followed the old ranger trails, now half hidden under fresh snow. The morning was eerily quiet, the only sound the crunch of hooves and the hiss of wind. The smoke plume was no longer visible in the daylight, but the tang of ash carried on the breeze. They pressed on, tense and silent. Near midday, they spotted columns of smoke rising from a valley. The group halted on a ridge, gazing down upon a grim tableau, a wide circle of scorched earth, blackened stumps where a stand of trees had burned, and wisps of smoke drifting from still smoldering embers. Bodies lay strewn about, mostly wildlings, by the look of their furs, though some wore partial black as if they were renegades from the Watch. Or perhaps they had simply scavenged the clothing. A heavy silence settled. Wild raised a hand, signaling caution. The party advanced slowly, picking their way through the charred remains. The acrid stench of burnt flesh choked them. Here and there, a body twitched or moaned, but many more lay still. Ravens circled overhead, cawing. Jaime gritted his teeth at the carnage, scanning for any sign of whites or an ongoing threat. Jon Snow dismounted, kneeling beside a fallen wildling woman. Her face was seared, but she clutched a child's corpse in her arms. Jon's expression darkened, sorrow plain in his eyes. "Mance wouldn't order something like this," he murmured. "This is monstrous." "Could be the others," one of Wild's men muttered, crossing himself. "They say whites burn everything, or they drive men mad." Another soldier shook his head. Jaime moved among the bodies, half numb. He spotted footprints leading away from the circle as if a large group had fled. "Something else happened here," he said. "Maybe a battle among wildling factions? Or a desperate attempt to burn whites? We can't be sure." Sam, who had come despite his terror, whimpered at the sight. He held a scented cloth to his nose, tears in his eyes. Gren put a hand on Sam's shoulder, guiding him past the worst gore. Nearby, a half-burned wildling coughed, startling several of the men. Jaime rushed forward, kneeling. The wildling's skin was peeling, eyes glassy with pain. He tried to speak, but all that came out was a wheeze. Jaime leaned closer, straining to hear. With a final spasm, the man managed a ragged whisper, "They are here." Then he went limp, eyes staring sightlessly. "They are here," Jaime repeated grimly. "Who? Mance's host? Or the others?" Neither possibility boded well. Wild swore softly, scanning the horizon. "No sign of an army now, the footprints suggest many left in haste." Jon Snow rose, fists clenched. "If Mance is near, or if the others are near, we must be ready. I say we track them." Wild's men exchanged uneasy glances. One soldier muttered, "This ground is cursed." Another wiped sweaty palms on his cloak. But their loyalty to Stannis kept them silent. Jaime took a deep breath. "If they fled the scene, they may not have gone far. We can circle the valley. But we must be cautious." He didn't want to lead men into another ambush. So they split the group. Half would remain here, securing the site, gathering any survivors if they found them. Jaime, Jon Snow, and Wild would lead the other half on a cautious search around the perimeter. They rode off, the horses stepping carefully over blackened ground. Smoke drifted like ghosts among the stumps. The smell lingered, clinging to their clothes. As they crested a low ridge, Jaime's horse snorted nervously. He stroked its mane, scanning the area. The slope descended into a narrower ravine, dense with pines. If a large force had retreated, their tracks might lead there. Jon Snow slid off his horse, crouching to inspect the ground. "Boot prints, many of them," he said. "Running. The snow here is churned." Wild nodded, beckoning his men. "Weapons ready." They moved into the ravine, flanked by steep rocks. The air felt even colder, the pines creaking in the wind. They advanced slowly. At first, there was no sound but their own cautious footsteps. Then, a faint moan carried on the breeze. Jaime and Jon Snow exchanged alarmed looks. They pressed on, peering between trunks. Another moan, louder now. Then they saw it, a wildling woman stumbling through the drifts, cradling a dreadful wound in her side, blood staining the snow. She raised her face, eyes vacant, her lips forming a silent plea. A slash on her neck gaped open. Jaime's heart lurched. He had seen enough battlefields to recognize a mortal wound. She collapsed at their feet, a final pained sigh escaping. Jon Snow cursed softly. "Seven hells," he knelt, checking for a pulse, though it was obviously futile. Suddenly, a deeper moan echoed from the trees behind them. More shapes emerged, wildlings, but their eyes were glassy, their flesh pale and dead. Jaime's breath caught. The others' handiwork. Whites. 4, no 6, lurching closer with unnatural stiffness. All were partially burnt or slashed, but they moved regardless, like puppets yanked by invisible strings. "Form up." Jaime barked, drawing steel. The men responded instantly, panic flickering in their eyes. Wild soldiers brandished swords, some cursing or praying to the Lord of Light. Jon Snow unsheathed Longclaw, the Valyrian steel catching a dull glint in the gloom. The whites advanced with eerie silence except for wet gurgles in their throats. Their fingernails were broken and black, their jaws slack, bits of flesh rotted away. One wore the remains of a Night's Watch cloak. Another clutched a twisted dagger, though it seemed barely aware of how to wield it. "Burn them," someone shouted. But they had no fire ready. They had dragonglass, though. Jaime whipped out a dragonglass dagger, handing it to Jon Snow while keeping his steel sword in the other hand. The whites lunged. Jaime sidestepped, slashing at one's arm. The rotting limb flew off in a spray of black ichor, but the creature continued, reaching hungrily. Another soldier stabbed his white through the chest with steel, only for it to keep coming. The soldier screamed, backpedaling. Jon Snow thrust the dragonglass dagger into the face of the white before him, and it shrieked, collapsing into a heap of motionless limbs. Wild swung a torch he'd snatched from a fellow soldier, igniting the rags on one white's chest. The creature flailed, engulfed in flames, but still advanced a few staggering steps before dropping. Another white, half-burned already, latched onto a Baratheon soldier, teeth snapping at his throat. The soldier howled, struggling, as the white ripped flesh free in a gruesome spray. Jaime sprang forward, smashing the white's skull with the pommel of his sword, then plunging dragonglass into its back. It went limp, sliding off the soldier. The soldier collapsed, blood spurting from his neck. Jaime knew the man wouldn't last. He forced himself not to hesitate, pivoting to face the next undead threat. Jon decapitated a white with Longclaw, the black blood hissing. Another soldier swung an axe into a white's ribcage. The thing reeled, then lunged again. Wild's torch found it, and fire consumed its rotten flesh. Step by step, the living overcame the dead, employing dragonglass or flame whenever possible. In moments, the whites lay scattered, either aflame or inert. Grotesque stench hung in the cold air, an odor of death and corruption like no other. Panting, Jaime surveyed the carnage. 2 more of Wild's men lay dead or dying. The rest stared, shaken. Jon Snow wiped black ichor from Longclaw, face grim. "They're not many," he said. "But if there are more..." Wild's voice trembled with residual horror. We must find the main host or we risk an army of these monsters at our door. The gods help us if Mance Raido's entire following is turned into whites. A rustle of movement to their left made them spin. Another wildling emerged from behind a rock, hands raised. He was alive, though a nasty slash marred his forehead. He staggered, leaning against a tree, trembling. "Don't kill me," he rasped. "I'm no white." Jaime rushed over, grabbing the man's arm. "Who did th? Is? Who burned the forest and turned these people?" The wildling moaned, tears streaking his soot-stained cheeks. "They died in the night. We tried to burn them before they rose. Some rose anyway." He gazed at the pile of smoldering whites, shuddering. "Mance's men scattered. He's gone to find the Horn of Winter, or so the rumors say. I don't know. I saw the others myself. I ran. They're coming." His eyes rolled back and he collapsed in Jaime's arms. Alive, but barely. Jaime looked at Jon Snow, heart hammering. The Horn of Winter. The wildlings say it can bring down the wall. Could that be Mance's plan? Jon's jaw tightened. We can't let him succeed. If the wall falls, the whole realm is open. Wild scraped a hand over his face. Then Stannis must intervene quickly. We'll rally at Castle Black, plan an offensive. We'll gather every man we can, search for Mance or these others. Jaime nodded grimly. The dead at his feet served as a stark warning. There was no limit to the horror that might spread if the living remained divided. Then let's return. We have our answer. Mance's forces are in disarray, but the threat from the others is all too real. They gathered the wounded wildling, ensuring he wouldn't turn, then made haste back to the blackened field where the rest of their company waited. They led them away from the site of slaughter back toward the wall. The sense of urgency crackled among them like static in the air. Men who had mocked talk of whites now rode in silence, eyes haunted. By the time they reached Castle Black, night had fallen again. The news spread like wildfire through the watch. Everyone knew, whites roamed close, Mance Rayder was still at large, and a southern king's army camped at their gates. That night, Mormont convened a council in the Great Hall, summoning all officers of the watch, Jaime among them, and Ser Colmar Wild with his captains. The hall was lit with dozens of torches, each flickering with anxious energy. In that council, Wild spoke of King Stannis's approach from Eastwatch. Another force would arrive soon, and from there, they intended to strike at Mance's gathering or any others found in the open. Mormont listened, arms folded, scowling. He repeated the Watch's stance on neutrality, but acknowledged that they could stand side by side against the inhuman threat. The tension between them was palpable. Wild pressed for an oath to Stannis, Mormont refused. Yet both recognized that survival might depend on cooperation. Jaime watched the exchange in silence, realizing that fate had brought them to a strange crossroads. The vow he had resented for so long had led him to the heart of a crisis that dwarfed any family feud or royal squabble. He found a peculiar sense of pride in that. Here, the lines were drawn not by birth or house, but by life versus death. At the council's end, it was decided. The Night's Watch would welcome Stannis's forces within reason, coordinate their patrols and supply lines, and in return, Stannis would not attempt to subjugate or otherwise command the Watch. A delicate truce. Mormont, stoic, dismissed the gathering with a final warning: we do what we must to hold the wall. That is our only purpose. Jaime left the hall with Sam trailing him, the steward's eyes bright with relief. We have help, Sam said, as if trying to convince himself. Real armies from the south. We have help, yes, Jaime agreed, though part of him worried about the consequences of letting an ambitious king take root at the wall. But it was better than standing alone. Come, Sam. We should rest. Tomorrow will be no calmer. That night, Jaime found a quiet corner in the armory to settle his thoughts. Donal Noy, the old blacksmith who had once forged for Stannis, nodded a curt greeting as he shaped a new batch of arrowheads. Jaime retrieved a whetstone and began sharpening his sword, letting the rhythmic scrape soothe him. Each pass along the blade reminded him that no matter the politics, no matter the swirling rumors, all that mattered was the vow. The vow to defend the realm. He recalled the moment he first stood on that bluff overlooking the sea, banished by Tywin, full of anger and regret. He had lost the life he thought he wanted. But now, years later, he had forged a different identity, one with real purpose. He was Jaime Lannister of the Night's Watch. And soon he might stand against an unimaginable foe, the others leading armies of the dead. So be it. He would not shirk from it. As the blade's edge caught the torchlight, he felt a fierce resolve bloom in his chest. All around him, Castle Black trembled with urgency, men rushing to reinforce ramparts, to stockpile arrows and oil for burning. The watchers on the wall reported scattered sightings of strange lights in the forest, of small groups of wildlings drifting south. Stannis's banners appeared on the horizon before dawn, an army marching in close formation, the Stagan Flaming Heart standard streaming overhead. Mormont ordered the gates open to them, though tension crackled in every yard of the fortress. Jaime watched from the ramparts as hundreds of soldiers filed into the courtyard, led by Stannis Baratheon himself, broad-shouldered, grim-faced, wearing a stag-crowned helm. At his side rode a tall, red-robed priestess with unnerving red eyes, presumably Melisandre. Jaime recognized the woman from Whispered Tales. Her presence gave him an uneasy feeling. Still, they came to fight the same battle. Let the gods sort out what that meant. For the first time in decades, Castle Black teemed with the bustle of a grand army. Tents sprang up outside the walls, cooks prepared hot meals in enormous cauldrons, and blacksmiths hammered away at dented helms. The Watch found themselves inundated with questions about the terrain, about Mance Rayder, about the rumored Horn of Winter. Meetings dragged on day and night. King Stannis demanded that the wildlings be forced to kneel or be destroyed, and Mormont insisted that any who laid down their arms be spared. The Red Priestess spoke cryptically of a prince who was promised, earning suspicious glances from the Black brothers. Jaime maintained a quiet but steadfast presence, providing updates on the land beyond the wall, leading scouting parties. Jon Snow did likewise, earning Stannis's respect in a measured way. The tension was palpable, but an alliance of necessity formed. Each day, ravens flew out seeking news from distant strongholds. Each night, watchers reported flickers of fire in the firewood, fresh battles among wildlings or whites. It was an uneasy calm, a lull before a storm of unimaginable scope. In those days, Jaime sometimes found himself drifting into reflection, recalling the petty intrigues of the Red Keep from his youth. How meaningless they seemed compared to the threat of an undead legion. The realm might tear itself apart over crowns, but none of that would matter if the wall fell. A dark irony weighed on him. The entire Game of Thrones might be rendered moot by the swift hand of an ancient doom. He had come a long way from the brash boy in golden armor. Now, clad in black and hardened by the North's trials, he felt more alive than ever, each moment sharpened by the knowledge of what was at stake. Every recruit he trained, every arrow he fletched, every night he spent on the ramparts scanning the horizon, it all served a higher call. There was no more glorious place for a knight than where the real war would be fought, on the edge of the world, protecting the living from the dead. And so he stood watch beneath the icy stars, wind lashing at his hair, Valyrian steel at his hip, dragaglass on his belt, awaiting the day the horns would sound and the tide of darkness would surge. In the hush of the northern night, Jaime Lannister turned his gaze to the haunted forest, unafraid. For he had embraced his oath, and in that oath he had found something that all the gold in Casterly Rock could never buy: honor, purpose, and the will to defend life itself, come what may.